So I just had a couple other notes here. Well, yeah, again, welcome to our second installment of online meetings with our Orange County rare fruit growers. A couple of Zoom notes here. If you wanted to, there's a button at the top of your screen that should say either gallery view or speaker view. If you click speaker view, that will allow you to focus right onto the presentation of the speaker. So that's one way to click, and that'll alter the screen that you're viewing. If you have any notes, feel free to use the chat feature. There's a chat window that'll pop up. If you hover your mouse towards the bottom of your screen, you should see that. And if you want to send a message to the whole group or a question for the speaker, type that in the bottom of the chat window and we'll try and get to you if we have time. And that might be a good time at the end to do Q&A, since Ben's got limited battery on his laptop, but does have access to his cell phone, so we could do a Q&A at the very end. And so if you do have time and the ability, please edit your name so we could take roll at the end. It'll be saved through Zoom with your first and last name and the chapter that you're a member of. Otherwise, you could just type that right into the chat window. And with that, we'll introduce Mr. Ben Kotnick, who is former chairman of the San Diego chapter of the Rare Fruit Growers. He's a skilled gentleman in many areas with a heavy focus on ecological design. And we're excited he's here. He's a lover of plants and fruit. And so let him kind of guide us into these worlds of selecting a nursery tree. And if we have time, a second presentation on Cherimoyas. So thanks so much for joining us, Ben.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. I apologize. I've actually, hello friends. I know a lot of you guys on the call and others that don't know me. I'm in the process actually of, we found a nice piece of property up in Northern California, so we're sort of in transition and making a move there. And anyway, we're actually at our property now. We were only supposed to be here for the day. I got on my tractor and I did my first, mow of our pasture and stuff, and then we sort of ran out of time. So anyway, I'm in the loft of my barn, and that's why the lighting is so wonderful and good. But this is going to be turned into my my office at some point here. So I am running a little bit low on battery, but I've actually lowered my my brightness all the way, so we should be fine. And so we're just going to roll with it and see how we go. If all goes according to plan, though, we're going to be able to bang out selecting a nursery tree and how to plant it, and then I'll also provide some information on Cherimoyas as well. So let's go ahead and hop into it. All right, so there's a variety, there's different types of nurseries out there. Most nurseries are brokers, meaning they resell plants. They don't necessarily propagate their plants. Obviously, there are some nurseries that propagate plants. Those can sometimes be wholesale, retail, that sort of a thing. But it's like any other product out there. The goal is to produce a finished product at a certain price point and sell it at a retail price point to make money and profit. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the nature of business. If they don't make money and profit, then they're not around for us to select trees from in the following years and seasons. There is a relatively short window of time to sell some trees and plants, especially flowering plants. If a tree has fruit on it, it tends to sell, right? If a plant has flowers on it, it tends to sell. Some trees are well cared for while in a nursery setting, and others are not. Just like you heard, Dawn speak earlier about, green scene. One of the hardest things about running a nursery is constantly, plants grow. If you're doing it right, plants grow, and so you're constantly stepping plants up into the next pot size up, or whatever is a reasonably respectful pot size. A lot of bad things do happen in nurseries. It's speed over quality, and oftentimes, so you see a ton of heading cuts, plants that get root bound, meaning they stay in a small pot for too long. They're fertilized really heavily because, again, you're trying to turn a retail ready plant as quickly as you can. It's pretty much impossible to find a nursery tree that has a decent branching structure to it. Of course, it is possible. With stone fruits in particular, it's basically impossible to ever find one that has a decent structure to begin with. The other thing that I'll mention is that a lot of nurseries, especially retail nurseries, they don't necessarily know what it takes to grow a plant to maturity. And so they'll give out a lot of advice, and some of that advice is sound by all means. But a nursery is a business, so when you walk into a nursery and you have a problem, they tend to sell you a product to support whatever plant it is that you're going with, or whatever your issue is. So just be aware of that. There's that bias, and they need to make a buck and everything. And some of those products are probably worthwhile and very good, but others, maybe you could save your money and just select a better placement or a better plant or something to that extent. So, when I give this talk in person, trees grow like this, straight up, right? They're reaching for the sun. They're not really, spreading branches out laterally. They're reaching for the sun because real estate is very limited. Obviously, in Southern California, real estate is very expensive. So therefore, we try to pack as many plants as we possibly can into a nursery to make as much money as we possibly can, given the footprint of the real estate that we're on. Of course, not all nurseries are based in Southern California, and plants ship, of course. So what to look for in a nursery tree? In general, I like smaller plants. They're cheaper, and people think that you don't get as much instant gratification, and that's sort of true. If you're going for how much production you can get in that first year or year one, then a bigger plant is probably going to provide you more gratification. But if your goal is to get to a certain point by about year 3-ish or so, then I think by the time you get to year 3 or 4, that smaller tree often catches up to wherever that larger tree was. If you purchased a tree in a number 15, versus one in a number 1 or number 5, as a general rule, the smaller plant, or the tree that starts smaller, will be doing better off by about the year 3 to 4, maybe 5-year mark, depending. So therefore, I like to select nursery trees that have a relatively small caliper trunk, 3/8 to 1 inch, somewhere thereabouts. I do have some exceptions to that rule. Avocados are the one tree that I tend to like buying in a number 15, for example. Occasionally citrus as well, just for a variety of reasons. Nothing too solid about it. But you're definitely looking to balance the amount of biomass between the pot or the root mass and what's above the ground that you're looking at. Because remember, a healthy, happy tree is going to have about equal parts biomass above and below the soil. So what you're also looking for, so when I select a tree, I actually don't really look at, I look at the structure. I don't care if there's any fruit there or anything at all. I look at what's the shape and the condition of the trunk. Is it appropriate for the size of the pot that it's in? And if it's feasible, I don't mind. I'll go ahead and pull the root ball out of the pot and make a quick assessment as to if it's root bound or not. You're comfortable doing that, and obviously you don't want to damage anything. And if somebody has recently stepped those plants up, you're not going to be able to do that. So just be cautious. Maybe ask for permission before you do so. But if that plant has been in that pot for any length of time, then you'll be no problem being able to pull the root ball out of the pot to inspect it if you so choose to do. Definitely choose an appropriate size plant. Color. You don't pick up one that has obvious diseases unless it's the last one and you absolutely need to have it. And then again, my last bullet there is looking at the trunk. Some very few trees require staking while young, and we'll talk about staking here in a little bit. Let me go ahead and just pause here for a second. And do we have anything in the chat? Or are we good? How are things out there? Audio's okay?
Audio sounds good, and I don't see any specific questions yet related to the presentation, so keep on going.
No problem. The key thing that I have here, and let's see, we got, cool, we can admit some folks there.
I just have one thing I want to note real quick, Ben.
Sure.
So we've had a handful of folks ask. We will be recording this meeting, and we have your permission. We'll be posting that to our Orange County CRFG YouTube channel. So if you search on YouTube, Orange County CRFG, we already have Don Winterstein's presentation last month, and we'll have this one up within a couple days. So,
okay.
Thanks.
Cool. The other thing that I forgot to mention here, and it's actually sort of the punchline of almost my whole talk, is I like taprooted plants. So by all means, of course, lots of plants are propagated by cutting. We can talk about grafted trees or trees on their own roots. We can talk about seedling trees versus named grafted varieties. There's benefits and there's good trains of thought behind whatever it is that you want to grow. But a taprooted tree, and especially one that's planted from seed in the ground in the spot that you want it to grow, is generally going to produce the best results at the end of the day. not all of us have the time, you know, the inclination, the ability to plant seeds. But as I'm looking to plant out a larger acreage here in Northern California, I'm going to try to plant out as many things as I possibly can from seeds planted in the ground in the spot that they're going to be. So in fact, I'm actually going to bypass the whole nursery experience to the extent that I can. By all means, not every tree that I put in the ground will be that way, but that's what I'm going to try to do, you know, as much as I can.
We do have a quick question here from John
Sure.
McNeil, our chairman. Potting soil or sand, peat, or perlite? Question mark.
For like a nursery container mix?
I'm assuming
Something like
so.
that. Yeah, I mean, so there's an infinite combination of you know, soil media that you can go with, and it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you're looking to just germinate seeds, you know, my sort of vanilla is 50-50 peat and perlite. You can adjust that to a lot of different, you know, flavors thereof for whatever you're trying to germinate. If you're growing, you know, containerized media, then you know, there's a, you know, I buy soil from A1 Hansen down in the San Diego area. And I buy their most expensive product, which tends to be, you know, a fair amount of peat, a little bit of, you know, shredded bark and stuff, a little bit of perlite in there, a little bit of sand. It's basically a soil-less media. If you're going to leave a tree in a pot forever, you want to go with a fairly low organic matter in there. You want something that's not going to compact over time, you know, especially if it's not feasible to sort of repot that plant, you know, from time to time to freshen, you know, up, you know, the soil media that you have. Keep in mind, if you're keeping dense in pots, you know, the roots can't extend as far, which means it's more dependent on you for water and nutrient needs, you know, uptaken from the roots. So I'd recommend, you know, looking in your area for a more reputable company that will provide, you know, a blended product for you. I do like buying in bulk. If you're buying in bags, that's okay. But remember, most of those bags are going to be perfectly sealed. And so that means that soil comes to you and it's anaerobic. And all the beneficial, you know, microorganisms that we have are aerobic microorganisms. So it's not like, you know, you're locked into that anaerobic situation in a bagged product, but it just takes a little bit of time to remediate, to sort of convert over to an aerobic microorganism, you know, biology there in your pot. So I didn't answer your question super well because it really depends on what it is you're trying to grow. But the product that I've been using for years and years is the A1 Hansen soil, which is available in the San Diego area. So what I'm showing right here is a white sapote tree. And this is a tree that I dug out of the ground. And so I'm over 6 feet tall, and you can see the root structure here. So this root extends, you know, here's the soil line essentially, like right about at my waist. And the bottom of the taproot that is actually cut off is right down here, you know, on my lower leg. So that root system is about 3 feet tall or so, something along those lines. And then what's above the ground is probably 4 or 5 feet tall, somewhere thereabouts. Again, I lost a little bit of the taproot here in yanking this tree out of the ground, no matter how careful I may have been. This is in a white sapote grove orchard. You know, Mark, I do recall these being cuchillo. I actually labeled them as cuchillo, but I mean, it may be wrong. But these were the seedlings in this particular area. So the question that I ask at this spot in the presentation is, you know, is there a nursery pot size that's appropriate for this taproot right here, for a 3 foot tall taproot? And the answer really is, you know, no. Obviously there are box trees and, you know, you sort of can do it, but, you know, you're paying an absolute premium for something that's in a box for that instant gratification. So my point being is that if you're buying, you know, larger trees, you're also getting a tree that is typically has, you know, the root mass is not balanced as well as I would like to see with the biomass that's above the tree, or above the soil line rather. Make sense? So it's a little hard to see in this picture right here. This is our buddy John Claynott, another San Diego chapter member. So look at the roots coming out of his pot. They're all right here. And the roots coming out of my pot go right here across my belly, and then down the ground all the way down to here. So these little rinky-dink trees that are in like a number 2.5 or 3, you know, not even a number 5, look at the roots that are going on. I mean, they're, you know, 2 meters long. Very, very long. So again, you know, if you're starting out with trees and, you know, number 5s, 15s, what have you, it's just those roots have been, you know, compromised a little bit over, you know, the time that they've been growing in a nursery setting. It is what it is. Those plants will do, you know, pretty fine overall. But again, if you're trying for the most ideal situation, the most ideal situation typically is putting a tree in the ground where it's going to go for its long.
Ben, one more brief question we
Yeah,
got here, and
sure.
feel free to divert it if we want to keep moving along. But the question was regarding stone fruit. Do you prefer growing from seed over grafting an appropriate rootstock for your area or soil?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm actually like I'm totally known for grafting, so I don't mean to double talk anything, but if push comes to shove, I prefer a seedling rootstock over a clonal rootstock, if that makes sense. So you know, with stone fruit, Nemagard peach is one of my favorite stone fruit rootstocks. I do a lot on Prunus cerasifera as well, and so Prunus cerasifera is a seedling rootstock. Nemagard peach is a seedling rootstock. Some of the other Myro plums are not. And with apples, I'm starting to use Sprout Free an awful lot. It's a trademarked one, but that's a seedling rootstock. You know, M111 is fine as a rootstock for apples and stuff. I'm moving away from M7. It just suckers way too much for me. So, you know, if I'm looking at apples, I like M111. I like Sprout Free at this point, and I've done some work on Antonovka as well. All the apples on Palomar Mountain that we preserved, we put those onto Antonovka, being a cold, hardy rootstock that's also a seedling. So again, you know, you can pick so I'll go ahead and graft, but I'm grafting over to a seedling rootstock that's, you know, small. You know, I place my bulk order, you know, in the summertime for the following season, and then I'm grafting up, you know, hundreds of trees, you know, in the wintertime or early spring, and putting those out, selling them, and doing, you know, the things that I do. So a seedling, I do prefer seedling rootstock over a clonal if possible, if all else being equal. Now, of course, if you're looking at avocados or whatever, and there's any, you know, risk for Phytophthora or whatever, then, you know, you want to be getting a Duke clonal rootstock or something else that's improved to, you know, hopefully resist a little Phytophthora, that sort of thing. So, you know, there's no absolutes in gardening. The answer to every question is it depends, and there's a time and a place for every management strategy. Do I have my preferences? By all means. Do I have my biases? By all means. You know, does everything that I say jive with your experience? You know, maybe not. But this is what's worked for me, you know, over, you know, my career, and I basically studied with, you know, all the legends from the San Diego chapter group, and beyond. So I'm applying, standing on the shoulders of the giants that came before me, and then trying to move things forward myself. Okay, although I do avoid, you know, July through September for the most part, just if there's any risk of Santa Ana's, which is anytime, you know, anytime in the summer. So avoid those extreme temperatures if you can. You know, generally plant during periods of low growth or dormancy is preferable. And the last bullet here is a tree that's in, you know, halfway decent soil is generally going to be happier and, you know, better situated for, you know, positive growth than one that remains in a pot. So if you pick one up, um, you know, you pick up a tree. I sort of like to put a tree in the ground by about June 1st. You know, I might make the call to hold that tree in a pot through the summertime or so. But if I can get it in the ground by about June 1st, I feel pretty good about it. If it gets to be July 1st, I'm probably going to hold that tree and, you know, keep it in a more shaded spot that's protected. And I'm just committing to watering it for the season. Then I'll plant it in the fall, something along those lines. So, you know, here's a root system. This is actually a Cherimoya root system. So you can see it's sort of a blend of a taproot with a lot of fibers as well. So this is a fibrous, you know, like a hybrid type system on a Cherimoya. Just showing you what that looks like there. And, you know, this is sort of me stepping up Cherimoyas. When I was propagating Cherimoyas a lot, but I went through all sorts of variations of this. You know, I did stuff in, you know, one seed per cell, that sort of a thing. You know, I did them in, you know, really small new nursery cups. But what I got to with germinating Cherimoya seeds, really the best thing to do is to plant them fresh. You know, and that's pretty much all this tropicals in my experience is plant seeds fresh. And then what I do with Cherimoyas is I sort of mimic what happens in nature. So imagine what happens in nature is a fruit, you fall to the forest floor, it rots, it's sitting in a layer of leaf litter, and, you know, maybe an animal comes along and chews it and spent at the South Coast Station in the Cherimoya Grove, you know, back in the years past when I was.
Whoop, looks like we possibly lost Ben here. Let's see if he pops back up. Ben, are you still there?
There we go. Hello?
Yep. We see you now.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that. So at any rate, though, just how cherimoyas grow is they tend to grow from seeds that drop, in the orchard or in the forest. And so you get a ton of seedlings that come up together from one fruit. So I said, let me just mimic that. And so what I started to do is any cherimoya that I had that was overripe or just not quite a grade A or what have you, I would actually just smash it on the top of a pot, and then I would cover it with a little bit of soil. A year later, I would step those things up.
Ben, it's saying one thing we're not seeing the screen, we're seeing more your video, and then second, it's saying your bandwidth is low, network bandwidth is low.
So we've talked a little about, yeah, that's troubling and not so hot. Here, let's go ahead and reshare.
Okay.
Thanks for bearing with me. Alrighty, here we go. So I just wrapped up just showing, here's a, cherimoya root system. So we've talked a little about selecting a nursery tree, and there's some other techniques that I'll talk about. So, one of the things that I've done, and some folks will poo-poo this, but if I'm selecting like a bare root stone fruit tree, none of those ever have any, a decent structure from the nursery, unfortunately. I'll occasionally, if I think I can pull it off, I'll actually plant the main leader at a fairly extreme angle, because then that's going to become one of my main lateral branches, but then I'm banking on some other branches coming out the side over here. And so I don't want to intentionally plant a tree that's, not, vertical, but so it would be a mistake if that main structure became very heavy. Ultimately, that tree might fail and fall to the ground. What I'm banking on is other growth coming out to the sides and stuff. So that's just a technique.
What?
Hello?
The brush?
Yeah.
I had a little gap in my thing.
Yeah, whoever's talking
Yeah,
about
I'm gonna
Right
the
here.
brush.
the counts.
Yeah, let's we're talking about their brush.
You can see me.
Thanks.
Walking.
So
Turn everything off over there. My cheeks come over here.
Hi, Lizette, I see is unmuted, but I'm trying to find.
Oh, sorry.
Yep. Perfect. We're good now.
okay, so we talked a little bit about selecting the tree. The next thing that we talk a little bit about here is how to plant it. And so there's the old adage of right plant, right place. You sort of can't get around that. That's your type 1 design. If you don't get that right, then you're constantly battling. You're doing an uphill battle. From there on out, so the life of the tree. So anyway, I just highlight this slide right here. It's a little bit off topic, but some of the stuff that I espouse is sort of the intersection of human-centered design and ecologically centered design, which basically morphs together whatever nature wants with whatever people want, and hopefully if we're thinking a little bit more sustainably and whatnot, what we want is what nature wants, and those needs are aligned and whatnot. So with your plant placement and your selection of plants. And then in addition here's a list of plant functions. And so most designers think at the element level, meaning they want something that's tall, short, different color, different textures and whatnot. Very few designers get into the functional realm, and the functional realm is like a plant that brings in a pollinator, for example. If you have a plant that brings in a pollinator and you have a fruit tree that requires pollination or whatever, now you have the process of pollination. So if you have a garden that's friendly to the pollinator, that has nectar and food available for them and that sort of a thing, and as you further stack these things together, you eventually get up to the system level. And the best system to mimic is the ecosystem, of course, because that's, Mother Nature is your hardest worker that you have in the orchard or the garden space, because she works every day, doesn't take breaks for COVID-19. She's there every time, no overtime, etc. So working with Mother Nature is a good thing to do, rather than working against Mother Nature. And here's just a list of things. If you're selecting plants, select plants that you like, that are, edible, medicinal, aromatic, all those sorts of things. With groups like CRFG, I choose stuff that tells a story. I choose culturally and historically important cultivars. I choose cultivars that were developed by our legends like Jim Neitzel or Eunice Messner and those types of folks. So speaking of that, choosing something that's culturally important here. So the first tree that I planted in my front yard when I redid it as a little bit of a showcase, you know, combining a lot of ecologic concepts, the first tree I planted here is a Thompson Cherimoya. As you know, Paul Thompson was a co-founder of our club in 1968 or so, and the roots of the club extend further back in the San Diego area with people like Jim Neitzel and Dick and Alice Snow and a few others. So I like to be able to know that history and that story. And so as a, you know, when I was, you know, about 10, 12 years ago, I sort of wanted to learn as much as I could about the origins of the club. So when it came time to planting, you know, a tree in my front yard, which was, you know, going to be a little bit of a showcase, like I said, I selected a Thompson Cherimoya, amongst many others, because of the story that it would tell. It's an excellent fruit. More importantly, it tells that amazing story of, you know, the origins of CRFG, for example. So I'm planting that tree there, but let's keep going. The other thing that goes beyond the scope of this talk right here is this is a sun chart. You definitely want to understand what the sun does. The sun is the most predictable thing that we have in the garden. Of course, clouds can interfere with that, but we know exactly where the sun is every minute of every day throughout the year. And so you can alleviate any type 1 design errors by understanding what the sun is doing. So when I teach like a full semester course on edible landscaping and that sort of thing, you actually learn what the sun does kinesthetically. I'm not going to do that right here, but the key things for you is that, you know, at the winter solstice, the sun gets to only 34 degrees above the sky or the horizon. On the equinoxes or equinoxes, I'm not sure what the right term is there, but it's about 56 degrees or so. And then in the summertime, June 21st, the longest day of the year, the sun is at 81 degrees above our head in Southern California. Then you can understand where the sun rises and sets and all those sorts of things. So I highly encourage you to just take a look at the sun chart. This one is from University of Oregon. And so if you just search alone and then click generate my PDF sun chart and you'll be good to go.
Ben, can you repeat that last part? It seemed to skip out. Just the last line you said.
Yeah, so sorry about that. Hopefully this is working out okay.
Yeah, I'd say generally it seems to be pretty good. So.
Yeah, this is a good beta test for me, and it's yeah. Well, I'm sort of on country internet now at this point,
okay.
So I'll see what I can do.
Good.
So this is a sun chart though, and you can download this from the University of Oregon, as it shows right here. I recommend it's solardat.uoregon or something thereabouts. If you just do University of Oregon solar chart or sun chart, you'll get right to the link. It's the first one that pops up, and you just type in your zip code. They have tons of options, but just type your zip code in, and then click the button to generate my PDF and go with that. You don't need to change the options really so much. So let's move into some placement. If you're dealing with subtropics, subtropicals, your placement is usually dictated by absolute coldness. That is, how cold does it get at the coldest time of year? If you're planting other things, Stonefruit's apples or anything else, figs, mulberries or whatever, then it's much less of a concern. They're deciduous trees and all that. But consider your hydrozones. In a group setting, I would love to be a little bit more interactive, and I start asking some questions and stuff. In this setting, it's a little bit more challenging, and just for a variety of reasons, I'm going to sort of keep rolling here. But the hydrozones then are matching plants together that have similar water needs. So if you're going to irrigate a certain part of your yard, more than others, so you want to try to plant things that are maybe higher water use together, those things that are lower water use together, and then of course tie them in on the right zone on your sprinkling system, the right valve or zone on your sprinkler system. The other concept, though, that might be a little bit new to you is a mulch zone. So, group plants together that require similar mulching needs. So, most trees that would grow in a forest type setting have usually a fair amount of mulch under them. Most natives, though, and any seasonal vegetables and things like that, they tend to not do as well with a thick layer of woody mulch, for example. So you can group things together by mulch zones as well. Just an option, again, something to consider. I'm not trying to preach anything, but I'm just trying to bring some perspective to you that you can consider and come up with the best possible solution for your context, because that ultimately is the key, is your context. And that's my one most major beef with any online forum chat, anything like that, is that there's a ton of people that will give you advice, but they have no idea about the context of your environment and what you're dealing with. It's just a very limited exchange. So that's why the real value of groups like CRFG is the ability for you to interact with your friends, colleagues, and peers, and they'll understand way more about your context than, you know, Joe Schmo on, you know, whatever internet forum it is. So there you go. Groups like CRFG are entirely relevant, and it's because we know each other and we listen to one another, and we can help each other, again, stand on the shoulders of the giants that came before us. So a perk test, or a percolation test. If you know what a percolation test is, congratulations. Take your hand right here and give yourself a pat on the back. Percolation test is one of the greatest things you can do before you start planting in a new space. You want to know if you have any drainage issues, you know, especially for, you know, avocados are notorious that they don't like to have, you know, their wet feet or wet roots. And so I'm going to just briefly explain doing a percolation test or perk test. What the impact of doing that is that if you find you have really bad drainage, you have the option of either selecting a new location or pursuing some alternative planting techniques if your drainage is really that bad. So to get started though, you dig a hole that's at least 1 foot wide and deep, you fill it with water, let it drain, and then come back about 24 hours later. If you come back and there's still water in the hole after 24 hours, that's your first sign that you have a drainage issue. You know, we had a lot of rain a couple weeks ago, so if you had, you know, standing water at that point in time, that's a little bit atypical, right? You know, we had a lot of rain in the storms that came about 10 days ago or whenever that was. So coming back 24 hours later, you refill the hole, and then you measure or record the drop in the height of the water over time. And in general, 1 inch per hour is the general distinction of, you know, what good versus bad drainage is, for example. And I'm going to show you just a picture here of, you know, here's a percolation test. This is how I do them. And so I'll just use a scrap piece of 2x lumber, and I'll actually tack on a yardstick meter stick. And then I just, you know, start my clock, you know, so I start the test at, you know, noon or whatever. If it drops, you know, 4 inches in 2 hours, well, then my drop is, you know, it's 2 inches per hour is my percolation rate. You know, if it's, you know, 4 inches in 3 hours, well, then it's, you know, 4/3, right? 1 1/3 per hour. And again, if I'm at 1 1/3 per hour, that's pretty good. That's fine. That's going to work for just about any fruit tree out there, no problem. So that's your percolation test. There isn't the best information out there. You know, I've taught soils at our local college for almost 10 years, and I searched around for like the proper technique for a perk test, you know, from an NRCS or something like that, and I couldn't find it. So I've come up with, you know, this is you know how it's taught though in a soils, you know, classroom for, you know, agronomy type classes. All right, so then let's talk about some placement in terms of tree shapes. Most of you folks will know that the traditional, and I do recommend an open vase shape for your stone fruit trees. An open vase shape, if you're not familiar, is sort of shaped like a big wine glass, and I imagine you can set a big beach ball right in the center of the tree and the canopy of it, right? Now, an open vase shaped tree is designed to have more low lateral branches, which means I don't like placing them near pathways or next to walls or houses and that sort of a thing. An open vase shaped tree should really be in the more of a center part of your planting. And then, you know, other things that are a little bit more columnar can go in those tighter to fit spaces. Of course, a lot of people in CRFG, you know, are notorious for putting way more things in their space than, you know, you potentially, you know, should, or whatever the, you know, traditional guidance is. So by all means, do whatever you need to do. But if I have the choice, I don't like putting open vase shaped trees next to pathways, for example. So if your perk test comes back and it's really bad, you can come up with some raised beds. And, you know, raised beds can take a lot of different forms. You know, this is one that has, you know, some landscaping blocks around the bottom here. And so they went up, you know, they went up about, you know, a good 18 to 20 inches above grade, and they made them nice and large. And so trees in this situation will do just fine. The other thing that tends to happen is that once the roots fill in, you know, this whole, you know, the raised bed area, it tends to slow the growth down an awful lot at that point. And so that's not necessarily a bad thing in an urban setting, because you don't want your trees to get that big anyway, right? You can plant things in a row, of course. And then I'm going to address the multiple trees in the same hole bit right here. And for the average homeowner, planting multiple trees in the same hole is not a good idea. If you're an enthusiast and you know proper pruning techniques, I think it can work just fine. Probably 90% of the multiple trees in the same holes that I've seen, you know, working with thousands of homeowners across Southern California, have failed and don't work. And it's because they're being planted by people that aren't necessarily that interested in doing the required maintenance to take care of them. What you're doing is you're putting, you know, 2, 3, 4 trees in the same physical footprint of what a normal like one tree would be in. And you know the pruning prowess of the average homeowner is pretty bad for the most part. And so just I address that right here. And this is, you know, from the Dave Wilson, you know, website. And you can see right here, you know, if the customer is not receptive, work toward lower density, 2 trees in one hole or trees 6 to 8 feet apart in a row. The way to maximize the day's sales is to maximize the sale to each customer, but without being pushy, right? So, you know, here it sort of is. I mean, you know, multiple trees in the same hole it is a technique that gives you that progressive harvest, that helps give you year-round fruit, you know, that gives you more variety and all that. But make no mistake, it's one of the clear intentions of it is to make more money, you know, for the nurseries that are selling these trees. So just go into that eyes wide open. And if that technique works for you and you're willing to sign up for the amount of work that that takes, by all means, go for it. Me being, you know, pretty good at grafting and whatnot, I do multi-grafted trees. And that whenever I do multi-grafted trees, by the way, the classic beginner mistake is that people put their new signs at the periphery of the tree. If you're doing a multi-grafted tree, you always want to put those grafts or the signs as low and as central to the tree as possible, because then therefore you're going to get branches that are more a major part of that tree long term. If you're looking to just preserve a stick, you know, for the next till the next season, till you have a better tree to work with it or whatever, by all means, throw that stick wherever you want it to go. But in general, multi-grafted trees graft branches lower and more central, because then they can become more major parts of the tree and not risk being cut off inadvertently and those sorts of things. So here's you know, 4 trees in the same hole. So if you do the math on that right here, you know, each of those trees really only has access to grow over, you know, 90 degrees or 1/4, you know, of a circle. So that means, you know, you're doing a whole lot of pruning every year. And again, if you're not making proper pruning cuts, then you're probably contributing to a shorter lifespan of your tree. As it is, you know, after working with trees a lot, I think, you know, trees fail for a lot of different reasons. From bad planting technique is the first and foremost one, honestly. Planting things above grade, you know, going too heavy with amendments and those sorts of things. But in terms of cultural practices, it's improper pruning that shortens the lifespan of trees, you know, dramatically. Over time and years, you know, making stub cuts that are, you know, pathways for death, disease, and decay to enter the tree, you know, that takes out the tree, and I see it all the time. I have a good pruning handout that has pictures of what happens when you make these poor pruning cuts. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about trees and lawns. You know, the classic front yard is a shade tree and a lawn. In general, that's not a good idea. They have completely different root systems. You know, grasses are 6 to 8 inches, you know, deep. Trees should be 1 to 4 feet deep or so typically. If you're in Florida, they go deeper, you know, in sandy soils, but we tend to have, you know, heavier clays in the Southwest, in our Southwestern soils. You know, basically the so what factors that you have wimpier roots if you plant a tree in a lawn, and then stuff like this can happen. So this is at Torrey Pines Golf Course, and this was, you know, during one of the golf course tournaments, you know, several years ago. And of course, the recipe for this happening is you get a lot of rain, and then you get a lot of wind, and then trees fall over and stuff. So in general, don't plant, you know, trees and lawns if you can avoid it. If you do decide to do that, then what I suggest is, you know, you have the main irrigation is for irrigating the lawn, but, you know, in the summertime, about once a month, get out there with the hose and just let it run, try to let it run deeper into the soil to encourage those roots to go a little bit deeper, something like that. So, you know, co-dominant stems and leaders and stuff. So don't pick a tree from the nursery that has co-dominant leaders, right? It leads to failure, premature failure of the tree eventually. It creates a void. It creates a spot where, you know, detritus takes over. And so co-dominant leaders, I see, you know, Helen, you're doing a great job, you know, showing what that is there. So, you know, co-dominant leaders just straight up and down for the most part, and you get that V notch in the middle there, debris accumulates there, moisture accumulates there, and eventually you get rot, and eventually you get a tree that fails. So don't stay away from co-dominant leaders and cut one of those out earlier in the life of the tree rather than later. So let's talk about how to dig a hole. So there's wide acceptance as to digging a hole that's, about 2 to 3 times as wide as the root ball and 1 to 1.5 times as deep as the root ball or so. I recommend angular holes with overhanging edges, and you scar the sides and the bottom, and I have a picture to show you what I mean by that. So take a look in just a moment. Place tree stakes now at planting. Don't place them later if you need them, but we'll talk about stakes in more detail in just a minute. You can always check the size or depth of your hole by using an empty pot, right? If you've got a big old, number 15 citrus or avocado tree, it's going to be 60 pounds of soil in there or whatever it is. Don't break your back. Just get an empty pot that's the same size and check the size of your hole, right? Make sure that you're planting it at the right height. You don't want to plant below grade. You don't want to plant above grade. You want to plant just, millimeters or like a ½ an inch above grade, but basically at grade, okay? And then we'll talk about the dummy pot technique. So the dummy pot technique, I didn't invent that, but I tend to promote it on occasion. So you'll learn about that here just a second. So here's my, here's my amazingly good PowerPoint skills. I'm being, facetious here, guys. So please just realize I'm trying to entertain you just a little bit as we talk too. So, here is this is a side profile view. And so what I mean by digging an angular hole with overhanging edges, it means that, the base of the hole is wider than the top. Now, that's the theory, of course. In practice, it's pretty hard to do that sometimes. But you've got, it shows your crown being about 1 inch above grade or so, just so that you don't get water, going up against the trunk, for root rot type situations and everything. You want to loosen the soil on the bottom and scar the edges, but you don't want to create like a compaction issue. So the reason why you don't dig deeper than the root ball or that much deeper than the root ball is because eventually it'll compact, which means the tree lowers down, and then all of a sudden the crown of your tree is no longer, at grade. So that's why if you start with it about 1 inch above grade and you do loosen the soil on the bottom a little bit, eventually it settles to about the right height. Just throwing that out there. So does this diagram make sense? This is a side profile view of a planting hole. Let's take a look at a top view now. So why do I suggest an angular hole, like a rectangle or something like that? The main thing is because as a root starts to grow out, so a lot of our soils, right, are heavy compacted clay. The soil at my place in San Diego is Diablo clay, meaning the devil's clay. It's super compacted. It's, difficult to grow in. I've done a ton of work to improve my soil, and, after a lot of time, it grows stuff pretty well. At any rate, though, I've seen it happen several times, and I have a cool picture here coming up to show what happens. But, if I dig an angular hole, the root eventually, it hits the edge right here, and then it sort of makes a left turn, and then it hits a corner, and then in theory, it's going to grow out into the surrounding native soil, right? If I dig a circular hole or plant in a circular hole, this root right here is going to hit the edge, and it's just going to choose the path of least resistance, and it's just going to keep circling around and around in the hole, okay? And if you don't believe me, look at that. There's a picture for you. So there's a tree, and the roots are going round and round and round. So this is why I suggest planting in angular holes. Sort of powerful. Again, it's not just me telling you, it's like there's a picture. So then here's here's a plant tree, and I had a pretty good formative. So some of my formative experiences with CRFG were really doing, garden visits and getting out there and seeing people's places. So if you're a newer member, even if you're a more experienced member, go out and visit places, as soon as we can, right? So visiting the South Coast Station was, fundamental to me learning about Cherimoyas, for example. I didn't spend as much time in the avocado grove, but, I went to an elementary school that our chapter had donated a bunch of trees to. They also had purchased a bunch. They were really into it. They had great trees, really good cultivars and all that stuff. They had about 40 trees, but 2 years after they planted them, all but 3 or 4 plants failed. And the main reason was because they planted them all above grade. That happens all the time with volunteer plant crews, because digging a hole in our soils is a character building experience. And so when you bring volunteers in, oftentimes, sort of like whatever good enough is, maybe not as much as it would be in your own yard in certain cases. So at any rate, here's a picture. This tree started out as being root bound from the nursery. It was planted above grade. And then my joke here is it's a really good thing that the tree is holding that stake up right here, right? There's that stake that's being held up by the tree. So, really bad, improper planting technique. So selecting a bad tree to start with, bad planting technique, guess what? There's nothing that can save this tree. This tree is going to fail prematurely, and there's nothing that you can do about here's just showing, what erosion happens. So if you plant on the slope and you have erosion issues, you don't deal with those, then you're going to lose the soil around your roots. And again, that's going to lead to, premature failure of the tree, either it toppling over or just, not having a stable enough, root system. So, the first thing that the root system does is it anchors the tree in the ground, right? The second thing that it does is it draws up, nutrients and water. Notice it doesn't draw up food, right? Food is produced by photosynthesis. So fertilizer isn't food. Fertilizers are nutrients, which help, cellular processes happen. But food is produced in the leaves and chlorophyll through photosynthesis. I just happen to have some cool pictures of me, working a shovel, back in the day when I was, getting going on some stuff in my yard in San Diego. So, getting that shovel really close to you, stepping on both sides of it, figuring out whether you can actually jump on it or just lay into it with a lot of pressure and stuff. So I'm a big fan of, if you saw me in person right here, I do the, sort of left foot on, right foot on, and then sort of jump down on it. So just showing that right there. I would do a dramatic reenactment in person. So when things go back to normal, we'll talk at your group again, and I'll do a really funny dramatic reenactment of that for you. Here's just the random picture of my cat, just because I get that picture in the presentation. So she's the supervisor. There she is, licking her lips. The supervisor approves, and whenever I dig a hole in the yard, she typically hops in and adds her own special blend. And sometimes you need a jackhammer, right? So this is my sister helping me out with a probably a 45-pound Makita jackhammer, digging some holes and stuff, getting some things in the ground. So a jackhammer can help. But in addition to jackhammers, friends can help too, right? So another good thing with CRFG is, don't be afraid to go out there and, help a friend plant a tree, right? It's a pretty cool experience. Planting a tree in the ground is, one of those fundamental things. And of course, as you guys know, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. And the second best time is right now today. So pre-watering the hole a little bit, just, getting it, some moisture in there so that when you plant this brand new tree in there, you're trying to minimize transplant shock, that sort of a thing. So don't flood the hole that you do, but, pre-water it, get some moisture in there so that the roots are going to be drawn to that moisture. So pre-water. And then we get into sort of the controversial topic here, which is to amend the hole, or do you just amend the whole yard? And so I mentioned that I had the Diablo clay. So I went with, and it's a non-calcareous soil, really heavy clay, probably like 40% clay or somewhere thereabouts. So I did very heavy, applications of gypsum, for the first year or two that I was there. I also did a lot of rototilling the first year or two. And that was to improve the physical, composition of my soil. And after I did that, then I laid off of it and I let the biological properties sort of take off again. So I was, remedying some of the physical, shortcomings of it through mechanical remediation. And then I was bringing back to the biology and, going with a more fungally dominated soil and all those things. And I'm a big believer in wood mulch. So I use wood chips liberally. I use, I'll spread, 1 to 2, big truckloads, 12 to 14 yard truckloads of wood chips in my yard every year. So highly recommend wood chips. Yeah. So yeah, somebody has a little one there in the background. So what's widely agreed upon, so let's talk about what's widely agreed upon. Do a perk test beforehand. You dig a hole that's wider than the root ball, but basically the same height. You stake it if it's needed during the initial planting, and you water it and water the plant in immediately. Okay. So that's, anyone, any, garden center you go to, anyone who's talking about anything, they'll pretty much tell you all this stuff is good stuff. Now, then to amend a hole or not debate. So I will let you know that, no arboriculture organization recommends amending a hole. Okay. So if you're in doubt, please don't amend your hole. And I see trees fail all the time because people amended too heavily, especially in heavy clay soils and stuff. So, but what is, I have a slightly different take on it. Whatever you have in that hole is the bridge between the container media or mix and what's in the rest of your yard. So if you dig a really massive hole, you can amend that hole some. If you dig a really small hole, I wouldn't amend it at all. If you're altering the biology or chemistry, that is through like some mycorrhiza or through adding some sort of fertilizer at planting, like, especially an organic, something that's not too hot, right? That's pretty fine. But if you're going to do something that alters the physical properties of that planting hole, then that's where you get into problems. So you want to avoid the bathtub effect, which is where water just pools in that hole. So you don't dig into a clay soil, backfill with fluffy stuff, and put your tree in there and then walk away and then irrigate the heck out of it, right? That's a recipe for disaster, especially for trees that don't like to be too wet. So that's sort of how I, talk about the amend or not. Remember, when you go into a nursery and stuff, they make more money if they sell you a tree, if they sell you some vitamin B1, if they sell you some fertilizer, if they sell you like, here's like the, the super duper soil backfill blend mixed, right? There's a time and a place for everything, but again, ISA, International Society of Arboriculture, and any other, reputable organization is not going to recommend amending a hole. So that's how I present it. If you do decide to amend your hole, though, again, chemical and biological things, amendments are more okay than physical stuff. Gypsum works on a physical and a chemical level over time, but it's not like dramatic. Worm castings, I like to do a phosphorus source oftentimes at planting. Nitrogen is mobile in soils, meaning that it moves relatively easily. Phosphorus does not. And phosphorus is the key nutrient for fruit and flower production, or flower and fruit production, in that order rather. And so sometimes putting some sort of phosphorus in the root zone at planting, if you can, is not a bad idea, because again, phosphorus does not move in the soil once it's there in place. And then there's some other things on here, but in general though, it all depends on your soil type, the plant needs, and your specific context. Okay. And if you're unsure about it, then just hire a professional in your area or talk to the more seasoned CRFG folks. You definitely want to install irrigation before planting if you're using below subgrade rigid PVC pipes and stuff. If you're going with Netafim or black poly tubing, then you do that after the fact. Here's a sort of novel take on how to do a bubbler. I hope you appreciate this. I tend to think reasonably creatively about a lot of different problems in the garden space, and I do feel like I have some sort of unique things to bring from time to time, and this is one of them. And so the traditional bubbler is a fine method of delivering water to a tree. As one of my mentors, Tom Del Hotel, will say, all that you're doing when you're irrigating is you're trying to deliver water in the right quantity to the root zone of the plant or tree. And so in this case right here, I've got a riser over here on the right side of the screen. I've got an 18-inch, I've got an 18-inch riser horizontally, and then another 12-inch riser over here, and then I've got a bubbler right here. So this is, 2.5 feet away from where the riser comes up out of the ground, and then the bubbler emitter is over here. You'll notice that this is size, so I can actually swing this whole little arm from side to side on the tree. So the trunk is right over here, and so I can leave that bubbler over here for about a month, and then I can move it over here for about a month if I choose to. But the point is that as this tree gets bigger, I remove this concoction and I just put my bubbler right here, and now all of a sudden I have a bubbler system that's appropriate for the tree as it gets older and grows. Because one of the things that will also sort of shorten or hasten the life of your tree is that if you're irrigating right at the trunk, creating root rot type issues and that sort of a thing, right? So does that make sense? I hope if this might be one thing that you pull away from my talk tonight. So traditionally, my web presence has been under the name Suburban Food Farm. It's going to be morphing into Kotnik Farms pretty soon. You can't see that there, but if you check out the Suburban Food Farm Facebook page, I have a lot of pictures of stuff like this that I think is reasonably dynamic, and maybe is a slightly different take that might spur some creative ideas of your own. So here's an above grade poly tubing, a Netafim style type of thing, and this is what's called an Archimedes spiral. So if you want to get an Archimedes spiral, is just one that has equal spacing or equidistant spacing between successive rungs of your spiral. So this is a good choice, but I shy away from. There are some people in the garden community that just go nuts for Netafim, and they say that's the only thing to ever use, and I call BS on that very strongly. The reason being is that if you're in any sort of broadacre situation where you have coyotes, rabbits, skunks, possums, coons, whatever, all those animals are going after water at some point. And so if you have that pest pressure, then going with some sort of polyvinyl tubing above grade, I do not recommend. If you have pest pressure of those sorts of animals, then definitely rigid PVC pipe below grade is far safer and it's going to last longer. You don't quite have the scalability and the adaptability of going with an Edifem or a black poly tubing product. But again, though, there's no fast one right way to do things. All you're trying to do is deliver water to the root zone of your plant in a manner that's consistent with the needs of your context. Make sense? So here's a little bit of technique planting a big old avocado tree. Here's a lamb hass being planted in the Carlsbad, La Costa area of San Diego. And so what I have right here is the hole is right here. And so, here's, the homeowner is actually pulling this tree out. I'm bracing the pot. But so as, he's pulling this nursery tree out like so, as soon as it clears the pot, clunk, it falls right into the hole. So of course, you can take a look at the root system. If it's root bound, yes, you can, break apart the roots. You can finesse them with your fingers. You can use a knife and just, be a little bit more, militant or, aggressive with it or whatever. But if you're not going to touch the root system, then I'm just pulling the tree out and then it just drops in. So I'm minimizing the transit of that root ball while it's in a delicate or, it can be easily compromised in that state, let's say. So hopefully that makes sense as well. Now here's the dummy pot technique. So you place a full pot in whatever hole you're doing as a placeholder. And I use this technique a lot when I'm planting in hugel culture beds. So there's a word that we'll talk about another time when you invite me back for another topic on soils and increasing biomass and stuff. But at any rate, the dummy pot technique is a good technique if you want to really minimize disturbance to your root ball. Use the dummy pot technique. So it's a full pot that goes in the hole that you're going to plant in that's the same exact size as the nursery specimen that you're going to plant. So in this case, we're going to plant a number 15 tree. So we got this number 15 tree right here that's going to go in that hole. So here's decently appropriate lifting technique. And here's the hole. Once you remove the dummy pot, I sprinkle just a little bit of fertilizer in this case in here, right? And then voila, this tree just gets slid right in and it fits like a glove. So again, I'm minimizing any damage to the roots. So how many of you guys have planted a tree and had the root ball just fall apart on you, and all of a sudden you have to like scurry and hurry and like try to get the salvage the situation, right? That's happened to all of us at some point in time. If you think that's an issue or a potential worry, then the dummy pot technique will help you with that. Okay, so dummy pot technique, it's another tool in your arsenal. Don't need to use it, but it's available to you if it fits your context. So no air pockets. You want to water everything in. You want to compact the soil a little bit. How I do that is I just basically walk around the tree, and I have big old feet and boots and stuff. So the dummy pot technique is not square, but what happens is the original hole that I dug was square, right? So it's a square hole. Put the dummy pot in there that's full of stuff. Then you backfill it. You water it in so that then the soil holds its shape. You slide the dummy pot out, put the root ball in. So that's how that one works. Okay. Yeah. What up, Ty? And the Thompson Adamoya from Brazil. I have no idea. Probably not, but it's the Paul Thompson Cherimoya from that part of my presentation from a little bit ago. All right. We'll keep pressing forward.
There was a quick question on whether you would do a square hole still when you're digging when doing the dummy pot technique.
Yeah, I think I addressed that, hopefully.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so, okay, cool. Here's another joke for you. Stakes are usually a mistake. Ha, 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 ha. Right, so stakes aren't needed for most trees, though. You'll see any public planting, they're staked, right? It's because those trees need to survive without being cared for or monitored or anything like that. So very few trees. So some avocados, they'll flop over as soon as you pull them out of the pot or whatever, or put them in the ground. Some mangoes will benefit from some staking and stuff, but really most trees do not need stakes, and I don't recommend using them. So if you do decide to stake a tree, use 2 to 3 stakes positioned about a foot from the trunk. Don't do one single stake along the trunk. I see it especially in the Annona group. For whatever reason, just people, in the Annona group, they do some pretty horrible things, in my opinion. Leaving like one stake in that tree, like wrapped with green nursery tape so tight to the stake. The tree's just not going to get strong. It's not going to be able to stand on its own. And, it's just, you're sacrificing, you're getting some short-term fruit or whatever by supporting that tree, but really I prefer to have a tree sort of stand on its own and not require staking. So if you are going to stake the tree, though, you find the vertical sort of balancing point by wiggling the tree back and forth, and then you stake just slightly above that spot. You can go ahead and buy, you know, there's the ties that you can buy at a nursery place. They don't tend to be that long, though. They're really only about 2 feet long, which means you're putting your stakes less than a foot from the trunk of the tree. So I use recycled bike inner tubes as my preference, just something to try if you want to go with something a little different. So these trees here are properly staked. However, I do prefer wood chips, you know, for mulch. I don't like using, you know, rocks in that quantity for, you know, for mulching purposes. It tends to retain heat, and also you're not, you know, you're sort of the organic layer of your soil. So, you know, the most basic soil profiles are your O, A, B, C, and R, you know, O being organic layer. By having the rocks there and stuff, you're interrupting that natural accumulation of detritus and mulch on the surface, which is where a lot of your feeder roots are, which is where you develop that fungally dominated soil and stuff. So anyway, I tend to not like rocks in a large quantity. For effect, it's great, but not as like a full coverage like this is here. So in this case, I'm actually putting stakes, you know, when I am staking something, I'm putting them out at an angle, just because as I put tension on them, they're going to start, you know, folding in. And this just allows the tree to grow up a little bit more. And I don't mind the aesthetic of it, because to me, that accentuates the natural shape of the tree, you know, being a modified central leader type shaped tree. So, you know, here's a few, you know, sure, go ahead and use pressure treated wood or whatever, but, you know, sometimes I just use, you know, 2x3s and I cut the end at an angle and I, you know, use a mini sledgehammer to get them in the ground. But again, you install these at the time of planting if you're going to do it. It's better. Of course, you can do it afterwards, but it's much, much easier to do at the time of planting if you think you're going to need staking. If you select a big plant, it's going to be more work to plant it, right? You know, a big, you know, something that comes in a large pot, that is. So just, you know, digging holes in our soil is typically a character building experience. And I know people in CRFG, they have enough character already. So choose the smaller trees if you can, in general. And then you're going to mulch and water in. So mulching the tree here, here's my little guy, and he's watering in a very special tree here. This is a 5-on-1 mulberry, and this has all 5 of one of our, you know, longtime members, a guy named Frank. So Frank is known for his mulberries, and so this is all 5 of Frank's mulberries. And Frank is a neighbor of mine. He's, you know, less than a mile away. So I created this tree over several seasons, and, you know, shaped it, formed it, grafted it on, and then threw it in the ground finally. And so this is the Frank Habitler tribute tree right here, a 5-on-1 mulberry being watered in by my little guy. So here's another picture then. This is a reed avocado, one of my absolute favorites. And here we've got, you know, again, the PVC riser over here on an 18-inch, you know, riser over here, which brings the bubbler closer to the tree. You build the basin that's appropriate for the size of the, okay. The story on the reed avocado here is pretty cool. My father-in-law planted this, you know, planted it from a seed. It would either be a lambhass or a reed seed, I forget which. I grafted reed onto it then at some point in time, and this is the first tree that my son and I planted together at our place in San Diego. And so 3 generations of you know, guys went into the story of this tree. So when you tour the yard in San Diego, every tree in the ground has a story to tell. And, you know, so like the Frank tribute tree, this is, you know, the tree that, again, you know, grown by father-in-law, touched by me to graft it, and then planted by my son and I. This basin should just be widened a little bit to the drip line, but all in all, it's a pretty decent, you know, it's a lot better than most basins I see out there, right? You know, how many of you have seen a basin that's been formed that is the same size it was when the tree was planted, right? It was never widened up at all. So, you know, again, just a little bit of maintenance every so often, you know, widen that basin up. And, you know, this would be great if it had just a slightly larger basin going to the drip line. You can also, if you're planting on swales, are a good technique. You know, the theory is, right, is that these aren't perfectly spaced, but they're spaced for the size of the trees that we went with. So any water that flows down here gets hit, you know, it gets intercepted by a tree in this position here, for example. So fish scale swales are available if you're planting on a slope. Just one technique, you know, or, you know, a terrace, you know, if your budget allows. But terraces get expensive. Fish scale swales are a little bit cheaper. And so here's, you know, a different take on it. So instead of walling the bottom, we actually walled in the top. Not right or wrong, but it's going to retain a little bit more heat and that sort of a thing. So just another option for you. And then we mulch the whole area. And so this is at planting, mulch, the whole thing. You know, if you want to go with a mulch that's going to stay on a slope a little bit more, you know, the gorilla hair mulch, which is just shaved redwood, is, you know, sort of recommended. It tends to not roll down the hill as much. But, you know, any sort of like rougher, angular, you know, wood chip mulch is going to work just fine on a slope. So here's that same planting at about 9 months. Here's a good old Peter's honey fig that I you know, purchased or grabbed at some point in time from our friends in the North County. I think this was at like one of the barbecues, the summer barbecues. I picked up a Peter's honey from that, you know, with my raffle ticket, or $5 or however that worked. But I planted that tree right here in the ground here, and the homeowner's name is Peter, so he went with a Peter's honey fig. Here's my front yard showing, you know, some pretty fast growth. I did, you know, that's not the focus of our talk today, but, you know, here's that planting. Here's about 5 months later, and then here's 6 months out. So when I plant stuff and I install things, you know, we all want instant gratification, right? And you guys know I recommended smaller trees. Okay. You can get some instant gratification by incorporating some other plants that do grow fast on a temporary basis. So some plants to try experimenting with, you know, would be squashes and melons, right? They grow really fast. You're only committing to them for 3 to maybe 5 months or something like that. They fill in the space. It gives you that sense of instant gratification. And at the end of their life cycle, you pull them out. And you repeat that for maybe 2-3 years. And once your fruit trees get bigger, you sort of stop doing that if you choose to. Other techniques are, I use cassia or senna trees an awful lot. They're nitrogen fixing trees. They only grow to about 6 feet tall. They have yellow blooms all year long. They attract butterflies. And again, you know, they're fixing nitrogen, adding biomass into the ground. So, you know, there's just different things that you can use, you know, for effect. And I also use potted plants. So I'll intersperse my potted blueberries in between, you know, my fruit trees. Then once the fruit trees get bigger and more mature, I can remove and, you know, take those pots to some other place or give them away or whatever the deal is. So again, we all want some instant gratification. I'm not saying you can't get it. I'm just saying to be a little bit more creative in how you go about doing that. So let's see. I saw a couple chats coming in, but I don't have my chat window up. Is there anything there, Ty, that I should address?
Yeah, one question on chop and drop. I don't know what specifically John was asking, but just chop and drop question mark.
Yeah, I mean, anything that adds biomass to your soil. I mean, like, you know, the number one thing for any soil, right, is add organic matter. Now, adding organic matter, you know, organic matter is living and dead, you know, right? So if you chop and drop, it was recently alive and now it's going to be dead. But putting roots down in the soil, I mean, that's a great way to break apart your you know, your compacted soils, right? You know, putting roots in the ground is the way to do that more naturally. If you're not going to do a mechanical remediation, which you can't do if you have an established planting area. So, you know, with the cassias and stuff, you know, I'll leave like the leaf litter there, but I don't really leave the branch woody stuff too much. But, you know, John, this whole situation right here, this is a massive hugelkultur installation. You know, so this mound that you see snaking down the front right here that takes an interesting curve and stuff. By using a mound right here, you can see the shadows, right? The shadows are going off this direction. So clearly this is the sunny side. So by going with a mound, I've created a relatively dry spot at the top of the mound, a relatively wet spot on the shadier side at the bottom of the mound. So there's a shady side, a sunny side, a drier spot at the top, and wetter spots at the bottom. And I planted all my trees at the edge of this big mound, which is essentially subterranean, you know, woody debris. And as that has decomposed over time, it sucks up moisture, it acts like a sponge. You know, it brings in, you know, beneficial microorganisms and all that stuff. It's you know, it's sort of accelerating the forest ecosystem, and, you know, via that planting technique. Some people call hugelkultur. You could also just call it composting in place. You could also call it subterranean composting, you know, whatever name you'd like to choose. So here's like that technique applied to a broadacre system. So this is a larger installation that I did in the El Cajon area. You know, we did over 1,000 feet of these, you know, terraced hugelkultur swales. So you're adding in a ton of, you know, woody debris, for example, some compost as well. And then, you know, everything gets covered, and eventually at planting, you know, this is sort of what it looks like right here. So not right or wrong, but just, you know, appropriate for a broadacre, you know, installation. The homeowner didn't want the look of compost, so we actually had to, you know, cover it all with the native soil. So there is compost in there and stuff, but it's also buried, you know, as a filler with all the woody debris and stuff. So just another, you know, planting technique at your disposal. This one isn't the best picture. Maybe this next one shows a little bit better here, but this is a really nice install. It's got a blend of natives, and it's got 4 citrus trees in like a, you know, a square, and we had a little bit of room left over, so we threw a stone fruit tree right in the center of it. So, the stone fruit tree can get sort of a little lateral. We shave off a little bit of the citrus trees, favoring the stone fruit tree in the center, but, it's a square with the stone fruit tree right in the middle of it. And, I like incorporating, natives, manzanita over here. You've got, your Baccharis broom brush, you got some lilac action happening, and then you've got a bunch of other, this is a toyon in the back, and there's other, San Diego sunflowers and, ceanothus and, mimulus and a few other things in this install. It's a really nice one. Here's another sort of interesting one with, a 5-on-1 mango tree that's really small right now, but it's actually huge. It's now up to 7-on-1, which is a little bit over the top, of course. But at any rate, it fills in really nicely. And then a few other stone fruits, and you got a lamb hass tree, which is there, sort of focal point. So, right, you don't need a big old shade tree that's, your ornamental pear or whatever, or jacaranda, which are beautiful trees, but you can go with something that produces fruit in your front yard. Why not? Just another, incorporating some, natural building products, but also you want to keep your trees sort of this, the homeowner wanted to preserve the view, of course. So, we had this is the one that has the fish scale swales and stuff. So, you plant in a manner that allows you to maintain views and, all the other needs that the homeowner has. So I'm a big fan of doing things right the first time. When you're planting a tree, it's a long-term investment. Now, in a commercial setting, right, they expect failure of trees after 10, 15, maybe 20 years. In the home setting, though, there's no reason why. I mean, you guys know the original Washington navel orange tree is still alive. I think it was 1870 something that it came to America. So, 150-year-old fruit tree, and obviously it's, on some sort of life support with all the in-arch grafting and whatnot, but, fruit trees can live a long, long time. So I strongly suggest doing it right, right plant, right place, pick the best specimen you can, plant it with, decent technique, and, take good care of it, good cultural practices all the way around and stuff. And if you do those things, do it right, then your trees take care of you in the long run. So that wraps us up on this one on selecting a nursery tree and how to plant it. So I'm going to go ahead and pause. Unfortunately, my website isn't even operable anymore. I discontinued a little while ago because my focus is going in a few other areas. But if you do want to get in touch with me, there's my email and stuff. And my new thing is going to be Kotnick Farms. So I have that website registered, but I don't have a website up and running yet. I have another kid on the way, and we just bought a property, sold a property, and Corona, et cetera, et cetera. So life is busy. But let me pause right here, see if there's any questions. Hopefully you enjoyed the talk. Hopefully you learned a couple things and you might be inspired to try something different. But go ahead and type some comments in the chat, or we can have a quick little debrief. But I would like to talk about Cherimoyas if the time allows. It looks like we're about an hour for that one right there. I could do Cherimoyas. We could get Cherimoyas done in about 45 minutes or something along those lines if we wanted to do that.
How's your battery doing, Ben?
I think it's doing okay. Let me just close out of there. We have, actually, yeah, we're doing great. It says an hour and 41 remaining. I totally went into my power saver mode and stuff.
Good work, good work.
Yeah. Okay, so then.
Any questions? If you want to type that in the chat window, that can be asked. I think we had one from Margaret Frayne earlier. That was a question when you had the picture of the pot with the roots coming out the bottom.
Yep.
Whether you would prune those roots when planting it or leave them when you're putting them down.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the best situation would be to dig a bigger hole and remove those roots and leave them intact if you can. That may not be possible. And with some plant, so like mulberries, right? Mulberries have super aggressive roots. They're not aggressive to the point of, raising concrete and stuff, but like you could prune a mulberry root, all day long and it's going to be just fine. Other trees, if you aggressively root prune, an avocado tree, it might not be so happy about that, for example. So there's a little bit of balance involved. And if I have my druthers, I would dig a bigger hole and I would slice the nursery pot so that I could extricate the full, root system as much as I possibly could. And that's what I would prefer to do. And just let's address a couple of the other ones here. So why do I fill the dummy pot with soil instead of it being empty? If I leave it empty, then the walls can crush the pot. So you don't need to fill it with soil. You could have it filled with, wood chips, a compost pot, whatever it is. Like I have bulk materials in pots oftentimes, so I don't need to go and fill one. I already have one that's full with something else. And so the whole point there is just so that the walls don't collapse or cave in. Recycled bike inner tubes, it's just what's available to me. Recycled garden hose, sure, whatever. Anything that distributes the load. What I want you to avoid is ropes and wires. And I have another presentation about what goes wrong with trees and like why trees die type of a thing. So they die because people stake them improperly using ropes and that sort of a thing. So nice spark too. Oh, hey, what's up, Mike Woolley? I'm glad to see you turning out here today. And thanks, Margaret Frayne. That's nice of you to say so. Appreciate you turning out and supporting the local chapters. Yeah. Yeah, the easy pick stuff. Yeah, so the easy pick stuff. So I didn't talk about like espalier and all that. So easy pick. I don't remember exactly what they were doing with that, but yeah, like you're saying, it was trained for that. It was so it was on like a dwarfing rootstock, and they trained it to be small and be like a patio tree or whatever. Like that's all fine and well. I have a few thoughts on dwarfing rootstocks. I used to be much more of a fan of dwarfing rootstocks, but I've been growing in clay soil for so long that dwarfing rootstocks just sort of sit there and don't do anything. So for me, I like a more vigorous rootstock personally, because I'm willing to sign up to prune the tree if it gets a little bit out of hand, right? If you're not willing to do that, then by all means, continue using a dwarfing rootstock and that sort of a thing. But let's see, does any other grower do that now in their absence? Not really. I think there's like a Pacific Nursery, which is the one that supplies Home Depot and stuff with their bare roots. They say that they do something like that, but their product, you don't even know what rootstock it's on. So, I mean, if you really care, then that's not the best product for you to buy. But they do claim that they have like their containerized or patio type trees, that sort of a thing. And that's the grower that supplies like the Home Depots. I'm pretty sure it's Pacific Nursery, and they're out of Washington. But again, they grow stuff that's for, again, like a Home Depot buys regionally, not locally. So, patronize, vote with your dollars every day, patronize the businesses that you want to support. And, there's lots of good businesses to support out there. Choose one that's going to provide you a product that's at, full retail premium condition. Oh, there we go.
I did have a private message that asked about large pots and root pruning, as well as small patio backyards. Any thoughts on those?
So when I plant a tree, I make the call of, am I going to prune the roots? Am I going to slice the roots? Am I going to do anything to it? When I pull the root ball out and stuff, so the thing that you can't tell is like, if that tree was root bound when it was in a number 1 and then got stepped up to a number 5, you won't really know that, because the root bound stuff, it's going to have like a spiraling root at the very center of it, and then the periphery, it's hard to tell, right? So again, which is why you sort of want to start with that smaller tree. In general, I don't do as much root pruning and sort of aggravation at planting as some other people recommend. That's not right or wrong. That's just sort of what I've done. I'm hesitant to completely trash the root system, but I do make the judgment call. There are plenty of times when I have done that, when it looks like it's a little bit more root bound. But I'll prefer to just get my fingers in there and sort of pull them apart like this. So I'm not making like a wholesale like razor knife cut like down the edges and stuff. And that's just how I solve that problem. And it's not right or wrong. It's just sort of what's worked for me. Okay, cool. Yeah, cool. Like cool. Like IV tubing might work. It's a little bit thin though. Like the gauge on it is a little bit thin, so that can cut in. But anything, anything that has some stretch to it that distributes the load, you don't want something that's pinching in, right? I have some other pictures on another presentation. I can't pull them up right now. I have a poor tree that I worked with in the Ontario area, Pomona area, and I took a bunch of pictures of it because it had everything wrong with it. It had like heading cuts, stub cuts, improper staking, tying, all that stuff. And it's anyway, just choose something that distributes the load. And we'll let Denny in, I suppose. Denny, thanks for hosting me last time, along with Kevin, the last time I spoke to your group. And Denny, you know, the plant that you gave me did work out really well, so thanks a lot for that. I appreciate it. Okay, I wish to change it over to a full-size Washington navel. Okay. Yeah, so, you know, in regards to the citrus grafting and stuff, just remember we're in the quarantined area, so really the only way to do that, you know, within the rules is to order certified budwood, and the only source for that that I'm aware of is the CCPP, the Clonal Citrus Protection Program. I think I got it. It's CCPP. So, you know, Joan, that's unfortunately that's sort of what I'm going to recommend. What you outlined there, though, is definitely workable and everything. But I just don't really do a whole lot of work with citrus because it's a little bit onerous to do so.
Okay, so we have a question on Cherimoyas. Maybe that would be a good
That'd be a good talk.
transition.
Good transition. Why don't we go ahead and transition? So let me queue up.
And I do want to mention while you're queuing that up that we will have this again online on our YouTube channel. It's going to be Orange County CRFG on YouTube. Cool. So if you aren't able to stay for the entire part of the presentation, or if you joined us later and missed the first part of it, you're welcome to check that once we've uploaded it within the next couple days.
Cool. And Ty and John, just, you know, and I'm sure there's others, but I know I've been involved in the San Diego chapter. You know, you guys volunteering and making this happen, you know, kudos to you. Job well done. You know, job well done to all the people that have volunteered before you and stuff, and that are continuing to do so. You know, these things don't happen by magic. So kudos to you guys for doing the hard work. You know, persevering even in these, you know, it's so cliched, these uncharted waters or these, you know, unprecedented times. Everyone's saying that stuff. You know, great, fine. You know, there's an element of truth to that, but you know, your guys' leadership is really paving the way for, you know, preserving the legacy of our group and your chapter. And your chapter obviously has an amazing story to it. You guys can grow so many amazing things in Orange County, and you have so many, you know, members that have really contributed to the overall body of knowledge, you know, for all of CRFG. So thanks a lot for all that you guys are doing, you know, as volunteers for this, right? You guys have given hundreds of hours to this organization, and, you know, you probably got like a cool deal on a plant or whatever one time. So, you know, thanks a lot to you guys for doing the work that you're doing, and all the other people on this this call that are doing good things for the group, and for, you know, putting plants out there in a more positive light. So thanks.
Yeah, I just want to say real quick that I think it's a really excellent opportunity for us to reconnect in a totally different way across the CRFG, across multiple chapters. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity to cross-pollinate.
I love it. Way to go, Ty. That was good job, man. You worked a pun in there and everything. That's well done. You're going to be a good speaker at the next meeting, I think, probably, if not already. So let's segue into Cherimoyas. And so we're going to talk, you know, mainly about Cherimoya cultural practices. We're going to talk a little bit about varieties. We're going to talk about flavor. We're going to talk about all those things, right? And so let's see. I'll just check that chat. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, no problem. You're very welcome. I know exactly, you know, what it takes to pull this off, and, you know, usually it's you know, a handful of very dedicated members, and it's like one of these things like, who wants to volunteer for blah blah, and it's like, you know, 1 2 3 not it type of a thing. So good job. Let's keep going forward. And so I do want to thank Stephanie Murphy and Nino Cupaiolo. Nino, a lot of the pictures were taken from Nino's Grove in the Vista area, you know, North San Diego County. Nino's a former chairman of the California Cherimoya Growers Association, or California Cherimoya Association, rather, CCA. Here I am holding a couple of Nino's fruits. We got Ronnie McCord behind me. Ronnie is a pretty legendary guy in San Diego, does a lot of work with soils and whatnot. Feed the Soil, I think, is his business, if I'm not mistaken. Here's Lena, who's the wife of a former North County Chair, Corey Krell. Some other cool people down here. I have some other pictures coming up, and here's Rudy Halusa and whatnot. So we'll get to all this in due time. So we're going to talk about propagation, environmental conditions, pruning, pollination, all the normal stuff. When I do a plant-based talk, I typically follow the life cycle. You start from a propagation from like a young plant all the way through to harvest, and then with cultural, you know, management practices, you know, interspersed throughout. So here we go. So we're not going to talk about the other Annonas. We're going to talk just about Cherimoyas. You know, many of these will grow in Southern California. They'll all take a little bit more work in general. Not really Autumnoias, but most of them take a little bit more work in general than Cherimoya. I like Cherimoyas. I'm not knowledgeable about the others because I strictly grow Cherimoya, and that's what has interested me personally. You can be interested in all the other stuff, and there's lots of good information out there. So let's go ahead and get into it. So here's a smattering of stuff, you know, harvested from the South Coast Station many, many years ago. So this is an old picture, but there's a couple Autumnoias in here, and then there's a bunch of different Cherimoyas, and you can see the sort of relative size, you know, on them. You know, people post pictures all the time, like, can you help me identify this Cherimoya? It's really hard to do because, you know, the form they take is also dependent on the pollen that they get, how much they're pollinated, and those sorts of things. So some of them are a little smoother. The ones that are more commercially viable tend to be the ones that are a little bit smoother. You know, so Chaffee is one that's gotten a little bit more notoriety lately because it's won some of the taste tests. So that's a Chaffee right here that's relatively smooth. Booth is the one that I can pretty much always pick out though, because Booth is pretty consistent. The others are a little bit harder to do though. You know, El Bumpo is reasonably easy to pick out, but a lot of Dr. Whites look very similar, or just white Cherimoyas. But you know, they come in a lot of different, you know, shapes, sizes. The flavors are fairly consistent though. There's not a ton of variation in the flavor in my opinion. So if you haven't had a Cherimoya, you know, obviously you need to do that. You know, what does the Cherimoya taste like? It tastes like a Cherimoya. It doesn't taste like anything else really. You know, some people will say pineapple, banana, mango, pear, you know, mild to very, very sweet. It tends to be a sweet fruit. So if you want something with like, you know, acidic balance and stuff, Cherimoya probably isn't your fruit. But if you want something that's really sweet, you know, Cherimoya is a good one for you to go with. I used to like eating Cherimoyas that were a little bit softer. And as my palate has sort of evolved with them a little bit, I like to eat them a little bit firmer, a little bit more on the sort of, you know, less ripe side, you know, for whatever that's worth. So, you know, the ripeness, you know, you can't really explain it too well in text or words, but, you know, you use like the fleshy part of your thumb here and stuff. If you stretch your hand out and then poke that, it should feel, you know, sort of about like that. And my hand's a little bit softer. Like, so a ripe Cherimoya will be firmer than, you know, my chubby little spot on my thumb right here. That's the best I can do, you know, virtually. And, you know, we'll taste some Cherimoyas another day together. In general, they ripen between about November and March in Southern California. But here's, you know, news flash in terms of my opinion and the opinions of Nino and the opinions of Jim Neitzel and others. The ripening times or harvest times for the fruits depends on when the flowers were pollinated. It's not varietal. It's not cultivar dependent. It's when that flower was pollinated. And guess what, guys? I have some data to back that up even. What do you know? The quote from Mark Twain is it's deliciousness itself. I don't know if that's really true or not. You know, there's a lot of quotes attributed to Mark Twain. This is one that I attribute to him, and it may or may not be true. But, you know, that won't let me stop me from, you know, putting it in my presentation. So here's a Cherimoya sliced open. That's sort of a joke, as you know. So here's a Cherimoya sliced open. You know, there's the seeds in them and stuff. Again, like I said, plant the seeds fresh for best germination. And, you know, here's one. You know, the outside flesh is green, or the outside skin is green. The flesh inside is, you know, pretty much white. You know, has a little bit of yellow tint to it every once in a while, but basically white is the color inside. There's a lot grown commercially around Santa Barbara and Ventura County areas. Bays is one. You know, in general, we don't recommend bays for Southern California, but it is commercially grown along with Lisa, White, Fino de Jete, Spain, and some others. We had a massive tasting at our San Diego chapter in 2011, 26 different cultivars. The top 11 or so I've punched up right here for you, with Honey Heart being sort of the favorite. Keep in mind, because I work with propagation, one of my nits is when people start taking liberty to sort of freely change the spelling on cultivars and stuff. Honey Heart is Honey Heart, H-A-R-T. So I'm just putting that out there. Same thing with, like, you know, the Peggy Winter, you know, mango. It's called Peggy. You know, sometimes it's called Winter, but it's the Peggy mango. You know, that's, you know, what, you know, it was dubbed a long time ago. But anyway, I won't get on my soapbox too much, but just, you know, since we're being precise and we're propagators and we're preserving stuff, let's try to not change the spellings too much and be precise with what we're doing. So I do have the complete results from that tasting from a long time ago. And then the South Coast Station has gotten a little bit better about publishing their results lately too. And so there's a few others that weren't at the tasting of that year. You know, Nino's developed ones called Fortuna, Vinea, and he does have a few others, but Fortuna is an excellent Cherimoya. For a while, he was very he kept that very close to him. And then I think as he's gotten older, he's become, he's realized that there's no point in him holding on to Fortuna exclusively. So he's been a little bit more liberal in sharing that. And so I was one of the first people he shared that wood with. And at this point, I've been propagating that, and that, Fortuna's out there, and you should be able to find it, as a trader or collector of sign wood if you need to find it. So here's the 2018 tasting results from the SCREC, the South Coast Research and Extension Center. So thanks to people like Denny Luby, in your chapter, and others who are doing their work at the South Coast Station, Julie Frank and Isabel Barkman. So I'll give a little tribute to Isabel here, towards the end. But Isabel has been, a key conduit for my learning about Cherimoya, and I'm sure you guys all know, Isabel pretty well in the Orange County group. So you can see a few different ones here. I mean, keep in mind, some of the tastings that I've gone to, I don't like the scoring system. So I'm not gonna publicly say anything about that, too much, specifics and stuff. But really, I mean, what is it that we care about? For me, I care about taste. I mean, a big fruit is okay, but a small fruit is okay too. It's taste and flavor are really, what I'm all about. So, the texture is important. I don't know. I mean, flavor essentially is my overall criteria in a way for me oftentimes, right? So just keep that in mind. There are limitations with tastings, and sometimes when it's overly complicated, if you have size, appearance, and something else, let's get away from that. Let's focus in on flavor and taste, right? We're a backyard growing organization. We don't really care as much about shippability, and those other things typically. So at any rate, if you're assessing something on 3 or 4 or 5 different traits and 3 of them are basically the same, guess what? You're going to favor that one that tends to be big. So there have been some Cherimoya tastings where the big one is the one that won, and otherwise it probably wouldn't have been that good because the taste wasn't so great. So I'm going to need to switch over to my let's see, I need to go to this right here. Okay, I'm switching. Let's see. Come on. Oops. There we go. Great. Can you guys still hear me okay? Is there any echo?
Nope, sounds good.
Okay, cool. I just had, my headset just, died on me. So now I'm just talking through the laptop. Okay, so 2015 taste results here. So, you see Orton as the winner that year. Deliciosa, and Booth is the one that typically for me, I don't really enjoy Booth that much, personally. But Deliciosa has been good for me many times as well. Thompson's been really good for me. I used to like Lisa, was sort of one of my initial favorites and stuff. Lucida's been a standout one for me. El Bumpo has been standout for me as well. People tend to like Selma. It's the one that tends to be a little bit, has the purple color and stuff to it. So that is always, attention grabbing and stuff. So here's the 2014 results. So I'll cycle through these again real quick. So the San Diego 2011 taste results here. The 2018 from the South Coast Station. 2015. And 2014. And I think that's all that I have in here. So I think it's best to form your own opinion, though. Don't listen to me. Taste is subjective. One of my mentors, Tom Del Hotal, our palates were like this, totally opposite direction. So when Tom would say, "Oh, you got to try this. This is delicious," I knew I don't like that. I'm not going to like that. My palate used to be a lot more in the sweet direction. It's come around and it's starting to evolve a little bit more to be beyond just sweet. But at any rate, form your own opinion. And a question I get a lot is, "Hey, what's the best one? What's the best cultivar?" Well, it's the one that's grown fresh in your backyard that's at the peak of ripeness, right? That's the winner here, especially with Cherimoyas. And that's why you see there haven't been consistent winners from year to year, right? It's changed each year because of that seasonal differences and stuff, and because the best ones are the ones that are peak ripeness. So there are limitations to tastings because you can't have, 10, let alone 20 cultivars, at the same time, typically being ripe. As far as then hand pollination, we're going to get into that in just a second here. I did see a couple things come through on
on the chat, so I'll take a quick look there. No problem. Soil climate dependent. Yeah. I don't think it's too much. I'll get into soil and climate stuff here with Cherimoyas here in just a little bit, okay?
Just a quick note that some of those messages might be coming in direct to you as a private message.
Yeah, I have a couple private ones, and I can't see what I can't see the bottom one here for whatever reason. Let's see.
So you could either, for participants, you could either send it as a group message, which I'll be able to read and can
yeah, in general,
over,
unless you really,
or
yeah.
then you can just you'd have to read off the private ones because we won't be able to see those.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I know. So yeah, so unless you really want it to be private, I know like if you did send something that was private to me, I get it. Thank you for those words and stuff. But if you don't care, just send it to everyone, and Ty can help keep me honest in terms of addressing everyone's comments and discussion. I don't pretend to have all the answers, guys, but I have studied this stuff pretty seriously, and I've taken time away from my family and away from other hobbies and stuff to go tour grow, to talk to the legends, to try to gather some data and those sorts of things. So I've approached this very seriously, but by no means do I have the answers. I just happen to be your speaker tonight, and I enjoy plants, and I've probably grown more plants than a lot of people, not necessarily in this group, because everyone in this group is a little bit nutty and whatnot. So here's a picture of a few Cherimoyas. Then these are some of the ones that Nino grows, for example. You can see that Nino prioritizes ones that are smoother because he ships them. So he's a commercial grower, and because of that, the smooth ones tend to ship better. And so here's some of the ones that he has. Fortuna is one that he developed. It was a fruit that he bought at Bonds back in, I don't know, 1990s or something or another, and he just planted the seeds and it turned into a winner. And so that was Fortuna, meaning fortune. He's an Italian fella. El Bumpo and Booth. And here we are then. We've got June Anderson, Bob Holsinger, Patrick Schilling cutting up Cherimoyas for tasting. Here we have me stuffing my face when I was a little bit trimmer and a little younger. Here's my mom, who's not around with us anymore, but really my mom is the one who got me into plants, who got me into the outdoors and nature and stuff. The power of a powerful mom is, cannot be underestimated. So I'm super thankful for my mom, and I would not be here without my mom here, without my mom making me the man that I am. And I'm very blessed to have a wonderful wife who's, very similar to my mom in a lot of ways, and being a strong woman who's a good role model for our kids and everything. So anyway, keep doing good things with your kids and your grandkids out there and stuff. It does make a difference. Here then is our tasting table, or at least one of the major tasting tables. And this was these are photos from the 2011 tasting. So this is a big one, and it's a blind tasting here. Here you got Jim Neitzel, who's not with us anymore. He's it's not the best picture of Jim, unfortunately, but he might have been eating too many Cherimoyas because he's starting to be like, oh. Anyway, not the best picture of Jim. We love Jim. I have a good picture of Jim coming up, though. Don't worry. So, tasting tables all around the room, numbers, blind, right? Blind taste testing. That's sort of important. So variety 12, cultivar 10, right? Cultivar is the real appropriate word. It's cultivated variety, right? But, we can use variety somewhat interchangeably. But to be precise, it is a cultivar. You can see, if you're doing fruit tastings, guess what? The meetings are very well attended. Imagine that. So a lot of people there. I also want to thank, Bob Holsinger has been one of my mentors too. Bob is, another conduit who got me into the South Coast Station and others and stuff. And I was glad to see Mark Bayless on the call earlier. I don't know if you're still there, Mark, but, thanks for being a homie and for, going on some trips to some groves and orchards, together a long time ago. And so just a little quick note on nutrition. I pulled this stuff off the interwebs. I don't know how, accurate or reliable this is, but I don't think we eat Cherimoyas for the nutritional value. Typically we eat because they're delicious fruit. But there you go. If you're watching this video on YouTube and stuff, Ben Kotnick here, Kotnick Farms, you can pause it right here and you can learn all about the nutrition if you choose to. So health risks. I'm not up to speed on all the latest with the potential health risks of eating annona fruits. But, just being a public presenter here, I have to, caveat and sort of couch some things with do your own research. There are potential links to increased risk of Parkinson's and potentially some other things. So just please do your own research, okay? I don't want to recommend anything that's not safe for you. So, you know, there's my covering my assets slide right there. So propagating them, germinate the seeds right away. You can put a bunch of seeds in one container. They're epigeal, meaning they germinate above the ground, so it raises the seed or the bean out of the ground. So therefore, a lighter, looser mix is better. And I plant rotting fruits, and that's what I mentioned earlier in the evening. I smash the sort of a rotting fruit on the top of the pot, and then I cover it with a little bit of soil. And I actually formalized some observations after planting thousands of seeds, you know, to our chapter in one of our newsletters. But the punchline really is just planting fresh seeds. So I did, like, you know, bottom heat, no bottom heat, indoors, outdoors, single pots, you know, multiples in the same pots. You know, germination rate, really, it was freshness. And that was really about it, freshness of the seed. That's what increased your germination rate. So that's what, you know, little baby, you know, baby one looks like. You've got a little root radical coming out right here. You've got a taproot that's already been broken off. So that taproot is now, you know, gone. It's not, you know, it's not that it'll never be like there. It's just, it'll never be what it was. This was like one of my early germination stations here, you know, with bottom heat and a light and stuff. Like, I thought this was pretty cool. So because it was in a garage, I needed a precise watering mechanism. So I would just, you know, punch 2 or 3 holes in the top of a water bottle, and I would invert the water bottle, and I could, like, squeeze it, you know, like that. And so I had very precise watering. I used to clean my seeds. So this is me cleaning the seeds, getting all the little bits of pulp and stuff off of them and stuff. It's unnecessary. Don't do it. You don't need to. Just be lazy. Do what nature does. Just let it all work. So I used to all do these cells, you know, in the little individual, you know, cell trays and stuff. It works great. You just don't need to do that. If you do it this way, then you got to be on top of stepping them up, like, right away. You can't let them go too long. So, you know, here, you know, stepping some things up. But this is sort of where I got to eventually. So this is sort of how I started doing it. Was I would just seriously smash a fruit, cover it with soil, and then a year later I would separate them out. If I did them, you know, if I was a little more diligent, I could probably get them to grow a little bit faster, you know, just individually. But, you know, that wasn't my goal. My goal was just to propagate a bunch of rootstocks, you know, for grafting purposes, you know, for me and for the club. I ran a small nursery out of my backyard for a long time. And that business is, you know, finally sort of, you know, senesced. I also did this style right here, just in some flats, you know, without any dividers and stuff. You can see there's a few avocado seeds in the mix there too. I also have bare rooted trees. So I did a little experiment. You know, I did some experiments with compost tea. What I found when I bare rooted Cherimoyas seedlings and then transplanted them, if I pre-soaked them in a compost tea mix for about 24 to 48 hours or so, they wouldn't lose their leaves at transplant, so they wouldn't be shocked and stuff. But after about a year's time, versus the ones that were just soaked in water, would typically lose their leaves right away. But what I noticed is after about a year, I couldn't tell the difference anyway. So you can bare root Cherimoyas for a small amount of time. You know, it's better in the wintertime and stuff when things are cooler and stuff, and then you do need to baby them a little bit. But in general, seeds are really easy to germinate. So if you can, just start from seed. But for a little while there, you know, I was going to some Cherimoya groves in Santa Barbara area, and, you know, I was harvesting rootstocks and stuff because they were essentially nuisances. They were either going to, you know, spray Roundup on them or whatever they were doing. And I just said, hey, let me go in and I'll dig them up. And so that worked out for me and for them. But again, seeds work pretty well because, I mean, look, you know, you can have tons of seeds, easy. So grafting, there isn't any specialized rootstock for Cherimoya, just pretty much plant seeds. You know, people are grafting Cherimoyas all year round, and that's cool and that's fine. I sort of tend to be more traditional. I like grafting them sort of at what I consider the right time of year. I know you're going to have some success, but I will also, you know, get on the soapbox here just a little bit. In some of the Annona groups in particular, people are posting pictures of, like, quote unquote successful grafts, you know, when the first hint of something popping through, you know, through the parafilm is there. And that's too early to declare success, to be honest, guys. You got to wait till you have at least a few inches of growth, you know, off that, because there's enough energy in the sign stick itself to start pushing out new growth. So I like to tend to graft in, you know, the March, April timeframe. So I'm timing it. So I'm harvesting wood, you know, if I can, I'm harvesting wood, you know, after natural leaf drop. and I'm grafting onto rootstocks that are actively pushing growth. So I'll store it for just a small amount of time, not much, like a couple weeks. You know, less is better. You know, subtropicals, the less storage you do, the better. And, you know, pencil size wood is easy because you can use matched caliper grafting techniques. You don't have to do, you know, any side veneers or any bark grafts or anything like that. And then, you know, my style is the way that I do stuff is I'm a parafilm, you know, with a green nursery tape and, you know, all that sort of thing. I don't really cover with a paper bag if in the field anymore. I just got too lazy. It's just something else to expect. You know, so this is an old graft of mine. You know, I haven't updated the pictures in the slideshow for quite a while, but this is still my basic technique. So it's a stick, you know, wrapped in parafilm, you know, with, you know, new growth popping out. You know, green nursery tape provides the structural support of the graft union, but, you know, buds don't pop through that. They do pop through the parafilm. And so here, you know, this is a successful graft because I've got, you know, a good 4 to 5 inches. You know, I have 1, 2 buds that took, and I have a third that looks like it probably didn't. You know, I went with 3 buds. You know, 1, 2, or 3 is a good number. And so that's a Cherimoya graft that's taking in a relatively small pot. You know, here's one that's a little bit bigger then, right? And this one's cool. This one's got, you know, clearly 1, 2, and 3 buds. And I just removed the tape right here. And this is a Lisa Cherimoya that, you know, from 2012. You know, here's a field grafted tree. This one I think is Deliciosa. Here's showing you a whip and tongue, you know, so you can do a wedge graft, whip and tongue, you know, whatever you want. I do a lot of wedge grafting. It's simple, it's the safest, it's fast, and it works. So there's Deliciosa. And then you guys know the labeling, you know, do your labels with a mini blinds trick, right? Mini blinds with pencil. You know, I advertise they last for, you know, up to about 10 years or so. You label on both sides with pencil and it lasts a good long time. For a little while, I was actually shading my grafts with a Cherimoya leaf with 1, 2 staples in it. I don't know. I thought it was sort of cool. It was a unique thing to try. It's not really necessary though, to be honest with you. Just graft the trees, you know, and they'll take they graft pretty well for the most part. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Just got your text from one of you guys on the program. Yep, we do have another boy on the way here real soon. So thanks for that congratulatory note. So anyway, so here's some soil water fertilization stuff. They sort of do okay with a slightly alkaline pH, if you can believe it, which is why they tend to work pretty well in Southern California. I do encourage people to grow Cherimoyas. They're no more work than a citrus tree, for example. And so, you know, plant them because most people aspire to growing Cherimoyas, and we can do it all day long. If you do fertilize, do it during the growing season after frost danger or apply manures. If you go with the organic product, you can fertilize any time of the year. But I'll just let you guys know, I don't really fertilize a whole much. I just don't get around to it. That said, it is an easy input that can help you get more, you know, growth and more fruit and stuff. So by all means, you know, fertilize if you choose to, but is it necessary for the health and survival of the tree? No, it's not. All right, so there you go. Some stuff there. This is the most confusing chart ever. So just take a look at it and scratch your head for a second. And when you get it, feel proud of yourself that you interpreted a visual representation of the annual life cycle of a Cherimoya. So it's actually not that hard. So the top line there is California rainfall. Guess what? When we get rainfall, it tends to be more in the wintertime. Cherimoya foliation, it sort of tends to correspond with that. So we lose leaves in about like March, April timeframe. And then we have, when do you need to irrigate? Well, when the rain stops. So, you know, we have, you know, May coming into June, you need to start irrigating through the summer. Duh. And then your Cherimoya blooms tend to be, you know, right after defoliation. And the reason why is because to get new growth, the new leaf petiole is actually under the old leaf. So it makes sense that your bloom time comes after defoliation. So let's get into that a little bit more here, you know, as we go. So here's Nino's place, and, you know, in terms of his soil, you know, he uses a lot of mulches and stuff. You know, he tends to manage things in a fairly organic manner. He's not an organic grower, but, you know, he does believe in sort of, you know, more the sustainable aspect of things. You know, he uses the MP rotator sprinklers for what it's worth. So again, another take on sprinklers. You know, the MP rotators are a good sprinkler. It's not an overhead spray. It's one that has like a rotating pattern. So you can see that right here. It's like 6 jets, and these ones spin around on this particular product. It's from Hunter. Hunter is a local San Diego company. Here's what the irrigation style is at the South Coast station. So it's not exactly spinners on spikes, but it's more like a 360 sprayer on a spike. So it's a mini spray on a spike, with 1-inch line that goes down the length of the run. So a lower pressure system here. The growth habits, right here, it's typically vigorous once the roots get established. So like a lot of trees, they can hang out, not do a whole lot, but once they decide to grow, they can grow. It is important to prune them reasonably well, at least every 2 to 3 years or so. I advertise Cherimoyas being maintainable to about 12 feet with, a semi-attentive pruning regimen. And you can take that for what it is. I don't think if you're looking for a really small tree, a Cherimoya is not the one, in my opinion, especially if you want more natural fruit set. So the wood is very soft. It's very pleasant to work with Cherimoya wood for grafting and stuff, just because it's so soft. It smells great. The wood smells exactly like the fruit, which smells exactly like the leaves. The whole tree has that wonderful smell to it. There's the defoliation comment there. We think it's attributable to, coming up from the Southern Hemisphere and stuff. And it's inevitable. If you guys have been around in your chapter or you've done any outreach events at this time of year, you've gotten the question, why does my Cherimoya tree look so raggedy, in early spring? Well, it's because it's about to lose it. So here's one. This one's been skirted up, but this is one at the South Bay Botanic Garden, which is one that our club used to maintain quite a bit. And so this is a very well-shaped tree. I would prefer to have some lower growth because the expression low-hanging fruit exists for a reason. But the amazing thing about this one here is that it has a nice full canopy, which is going to preserve humidity and moisture. By preserving humidity and moisture, we're going to have some overlap in the cycling of our flowers. And that's important for natural pollination. And we'll get into that here, real soon. So this is showing the new leaf petiole comes from where you break off the old leaf. So I'm breaking off the leaf here, and this is where the new growth occurs then. Okay, so it has to lose leaves to grow new. Do you have to strip the leaves yourself? If you have an abundance of time on your hands, by all means do that. But if you don't, then don't do it. There's a lot of discussions in the online groups about people stripping the leaves and forcing flowering and stuff. Like, that's cool, that's fine. But there's no need to do that if you're okay with the natural cycle of things. So in pruning, you're trying to create a nice canopy that traps moisture to allow greater natural pollination. Use standard, drop crotch, natural target pruning cuts and stuff. You're going for a modified central leader shape, which is a lollipop, type profile and stuff. The tree, the bark can sunburn and stuff, so be cautious about that. And it is very common for you to have just, branch dieback for no good reason. It's similar to citrus, how if you get into a citrus tree, you'll see there's just like a lot of dead wood everywhere. If you start looking at a citrus tree closely, you'll see tons and tons of small dead wood in there, and the same is true of Cherimoyas. So get in there and clean that out, as you can. Here's a picture from the South Coast station after we did a fairly massive pruning one year. So the South Coast station is great because the trees aren't, necessarily cared for super well. It's a lot of volunteer labor that's inconsistent and, very different in terms of their skill and attentiveness and whatnot. But the trees produce tons of fruit with nobody there pollinating things, right? So here's some bad pruning work. And the reason why this is bad, it's sort of understandable. It's because they didn't have the proper influence to do it. So they're well, that's understandable from a safety type perspective of the person, but it's really poor pruning technique. You're going to produce lion tails, which are going to make, more vigorous growth come up, and then the problem's going to be worse in the next year to 2 years after that. So natural target drop crotch pruning techniques, that's the way to go. I'm sure you guys have like a pruning expert in your local chapter, and reach out to them. As long as they're talking about not making heading cuts, they're talking about natural target or drop crotch pruning techniques, and listen to what they have to say. So here you can see, what happens then is the growth gets to be very dense, and you get a branch that sort of is like a water sprout that goes straight up. It gets laden with fruit, and then it flops over, similar to citrus. And then branches start crossing. And when branches start crossing, then they rub together. pathways for death, disease, decay to enter the tree and stuff, all that occurs, and it's not good. So by all means, get out there with your hand pruners and stuff, but have multiple tools available to you. You want to have, my basic pruning kit is, hand pruners, loppers, and saw, a folding saw, and a ladder. There's other tools of the trade and stuff, but, you want to have multiple tools. If you only have one tool, then, you're going to cut everything with that. And, you want to make cuts properly with, good, nice, sharp, sterile tools. It's cool, actually. Master Gardeners in San Diego has adopted my 3 S's of tool maintenance. So it's to scrub, sharpen, and sterilize. So scrub, sharpen, sterilize. And I sharpen all my stuff a little bit more uniquely. I don't go for the emery boards and stuff. I go straight to a belt sander, and that's why I Here's our buddy Jim Neitzel in a tree when he was probably 75-ish or so, somewhere thereabouts. So hopefully I'm able to climb a tree and look that good doing it when I'm his age. Jim is gardening in the garden in the sky, as you guys know, though, now. So Jim was a good guy, gave a ton to our local chapter. So thanks, Jim. Here I am with Isabel on the left. So Isabel, if you're out there, Isabel, you're a super nice lady. I've had a lot of fun with you. Helped me a lot, especially allowing me to come into the South Coast Station and be one of the sort of privileged members that gets to spend a significant amount of time, or at least I was able to when it was a little bit more copacetic to do so. We got Bob Holsinger down on the bottom right. Bob is a really good guy. He's also been a good fruit explorer over the years and stuff, and he's furthered things along. And so then we'll get into pollinating. Okay, so do I need to hand pollinate my fruit? The need for hand pollination increases as you get away from the most ideal climates. So we don't, it's my belief, and it's the belief that was passed on and reinforced me by others, that there are no like self-fruiting or fruitful, cultivars. That's not a cultivar dependent phenomena. It's more of an environmental factor phenomena. So if you have your trees in the right area, and the right area is a coastal valley, it's one that has humidity, and it's one that never gets too cold, and that is a fairly constant temperature. That's the best environmental conditions for us in Southern California, which is why the South Coast Station being in Irvine, it's fairly coastally influenced. It's at a little bit of a low spot. And so the temperatures, it has all those factors, right? So they get great, copious natural fruit set. And that's really what, all the trusted people in like the CRFG world that I talk to, that's what we all go with, is it's environmental. The tree's ability to be naturally pollinating is environmental for us. As far as I know, we do not have the Nitidula beetle here in San Diego or Orange County or LA County. I have heard that they've introduced it in Ventura and Santa Barbara counties, because that's where they grow things a little bit more commercially and stuff. So anyway, that's my, my short and fast on pollination. Now, to learn how to do it, then we need to understand a little bit more about how it goes. So on the previous slide, though, we talk about flowers starting in a female phase and then going into a male phase. So let's learn more about that. So here's the little beetle right here. And right here, it's a little guy. And here we are, we're starting to harvest some pollen. I recommend Alex Silber from Papaya Tree Nursery's hand pollination video. The soundtrack will bring you back to, junior high science class or middle school science class. It's a really snappy, like, NPR-ish type, theme song, but the content is really good. It's spot on. So I agree with what, Alex presents in that video, for example. So you can check that out. So here's a female stage flower that's, opening up. And here's a male sage flower that's fully opened. So here's showing you sort of that you have, anthers, the male sex organs and stuff are they're going to have the pollen on it for you. That's what you're looking to harvest. And so here's your female stage flower that lasts for about 18 to 24 hours in some cases. Your male stage is a little bit less because once it's in the male stage, it'll start to dry up and desiccate and die. So here's, your female stage flowers. And so, one of the techniques is the old, black film canister and stuff. And so the cool thing there is because you can see the pollen in it really well, you use like a natural hair brush and you get the pollen on the brush and then you go into a female phase flower and you replicate what the Nitsidula beetle would be doing in the wild, and you pollinate it. So watch Alex Silber's video if you want to learn this technique when working with a paintbrush. Nino uses a slightly different technique. He uses this little pollinating gun. It's a little air gun. And so he fills the whole thing up with pollen, and then the tip is over here, and then he just gives it a little squeeze, and then it injects the pollen. So he can go around and pollinate thousands of flowers at one shot. He's also spending several hours in the morning, harvesting the pollen though. So here's Nino using his, little air gun to do so. And here's one of his, apprentice helpers. This is Stephanie working here, showing her technique, getting the, the exit from the little handgun blower. It goes into the flower there. And then just like Alex teaches in the video, you break off one of the petals to indicate that you pollinated the flower. So this is hand pollination. It's really not that hard. You can learn it and stuff. It's just another chore to do in the garden. If you're intimidated by it, just fertilize one time less, and it's the same amount of time. If you get out there and just pollinate flowers. So here's fruit set. You can start to see fruit pretty quickly thereafter. Don't pay attention to the color the discoloration here if you think this is because of a heat wave or whatever. But this is just, Nino taking a few pictures. And so hand pollination allows you to extend the season. If you're a commercial grower, the most expensive fruit is the first to market. So he always tries to be sort of the first to market. And he has great varieties, great genetics, of course, too. This is some notes from him. And as you see, the last bullet there is a punchline. The harvest times are dictated by when flowers are pollinated. Harvesting differences are basically inconsistent or not attributable to different cultivars. It's really the timing for pollinating the flower. And here's some of the data. As CRFG people, we should be keeping a little bit of data every now and again. So he started keeping some data in 2012, in the 2012-13 season. And you can see he started to, so here's flowers. Here's pounds of fruit. So here he started to pollinate in August, right?
And we had you cut out briefly. You might have to repeat that.
No problem. So he started, the bulk of his pollinating was done in July and August. And that corresponded to a big bumper crop in March, April, and May, even into June. That's really late in the year. Typically we have fruit a little bit earlier. Now let's see what he does. Now he starts to pollinate, and of course he's ramping up. He's pollinating more in May and June and July and ramping down here. So now let's see, he's starting to get more fruit in December and January, and then some to March too, and April's still pretty heavy over here. But you can see he's starting to get fruit earlier as he's pollinating earlier in the year. Now in the 2014-15 season, which is when this data is from, so we don't have this data, he's continuing that trend, and he's actually pollinating even earlier in the year, right? And so what this is doing is it's helping him be the first to market with his commercial Cherimoyas. Right, so this tends to back up that whole it's the timing of the pollination, not really the cultivar dependency in terms of when the fruit comes back. Okay, so I think I've hopefully given you as much as I can in a way on sort of pollination and stuff, and that is definitely one of the more popular topics to ask about with Cherimoyas. So we're going to go through a few pests and stuff, and then we're going to wrap on evening with you guys, and I really appreciate having me out. And John and the crew, and some of the people in the past like Danny and Kevin who have helped me attend and be part of your chapter in the limited ways I can be. So there's a lot of different pests, and then we won't get into too much of IPM or integrated pest management here, but on my trees it's scale and ants tend to be the biggest issues and stuff. The best way to treat those is to stay ahead, is to not get too far behind, is to do decent pruning and stuff. Don't let too many branches contact the ground and that sort of a thing. And if you want to use a tanglefoot or whatever, that's great. It does require a little bit more upkeep. And tanglefoot is that sticky stuff You never put it directly on the bark. You always pre-wrap the trunk with something first, and then you apply the sticky stuff, aka tanglefoot, onto that. You know, Nino has problems with squirrels, you know, birds, and then he actually lives right off of Gopher Canyon, and so he's got gophers and stuff. But he has rabbits. He has all sorts of pests and stuff. So there's different controls for all of those. You know, misshapen fruit is just in distribution of pollen, you know, at the time of pollination. Sunburn is an issue. You know, the bark is reasonably tender. Don't be afraid to paint your trees. I enjoy painting trees. It also helps me learn, you know, how they grow over time. It helps me learn where the fruit set is on certain plants and all that. So painting trees is a good thing to do. And of course, that's, you know, 50-50 interior flat latex paint, you know, on any exposed wood surface. You know, here you had some branches, you know, so the branches tend to get a little bit weakly attached when they go straight up, and then they flop over and stuff. And then you get, you know, stripped bark, and you get these massive wounds that never really, you know, fully see. See how we're doing. I don't know what kind of squirrel I have. I just have general squirrels that I tend to trap and relocate when I can. Do I suggest
Ben, are you still there? Sounds like it just cut out. Looks like Ben's sound just cut out, so we'll give him a sec and see if that comes back. All right, looks like we might still be cut. John, did you want to say something in particular?
All right, we're gonna have to get to the big finish, guys. Okay.
Okay, there we go. Ben, you're back. Yep.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for your patience, guys. Again, you know, some sort of extending circumstances here. I ended up being spraying in which the property is. I couldn't make it back to where I'm staying in the Tahoe area where I have a power cord and not and a better internet connection. But so here, let's go to the big finish on this, and then we'll let you guys have a good night's sleep and stuff. But you know, branches rubbing is a problem. You know, opens the wound. Santa Anas and stuff, you know, are somewhat problematic, and you know, high humidity. If you do live coastally, you get a lot of humidity. But again, your Cherimoyas don't do well in Florida, for example. The native habitat is on the slopes of the Andes Mountains, and you'll take a look right here. It's you know 58-55 inches. Eternal springtime. The pH tends to be similar we have here in Southern California. So the only thing that we don't have is the ample rainfall that they get in those, you know, in the native habitat in South America, for example. But the annual temperatures you see down here are between 59 and 68 degrees. So again, relatively stable temperature. So the best place for constant in temperature. You know, this is an open air market in Peru that I went to, and so I hiked the Inca Trail a long time.
Looks like we might have lost Ben again. We might be here at the close. Yep, John.
Okay, well, I don't know whether Ben can hear us, but thanks, Ben. It was a great presentation, or two presentations. And thanks everybody for the questions, and thanks for the answers. We certainly packed a lot of information into a short time frame. Thanks again. You're back online? Okay, I guess he's not. I'll just keep going. I'm sure that everybody agrees the format is not bad. If we had all of the electronics right, we'd be okay. Benny, you there?
There's Rudy. I think I've done, but here's a great picture, guys. I mean, Elixir, along with Rudy Halus and Neitzel. So, you know, these three here in the front, Eunice, Rudy, and Jem, absolute legends. You know, very thankful for them. And, you know, here's Isabel and Fang. There's Bob. There's Isabel and Darren Haler. And then there's a
It sounds like he might be just about out of battery on some of his stuff.
Here's the key takeaways, guys. I'm sorry that we're running into technical difficulties now, but you know, there's the key takeaways for you. I hope you learned something. Thanks a lot for having me, and I'll just wrap it there because I think I'm going to probably drop the connection here in just a second. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Ben. Appreciate it. It was wonderful presentations, both of them, and I thank everybody for the questions and your answers. We've got some things to still work out relative to the quality of presentations, but for a start, I think this has made great inroads. I'd like to remind people, if we have some visitors that are not members of the California Rare Fruit Growers, then I encourage you to become members. There's a lot of like-minded people out there. We all want to grow, we all want to share. And yeah, this is the sort of thing that we can present to people electronically or at meetings, and we encourage everybody to participate. You know, under the current situation, there's not a lot we can do except, you know, go back to the Second World War, perhaps with victory gardens and stuff like that. Grow some stuff for yourselves. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but there might be people out there that can go beyond this group and encourage other people to do the same thing that we're trying to do. Again, thanks very much to everybody. And if there's nothing else to do, it might pay us to let Ben go, and we can all go. Stay safe, everybody, and virus-free. And thank you very much for your participation, your support, and your patronage. Keep it all up. Take care.
John.
Yeah.
Can we see if we can get a copy of that presentation file so people can view it? What do you think, Ty?
I have a copy that's saved on my computer, so I'd be happy to share that.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, so they just email our chapter, we can give it to them.
Yep, anyone that needs a copy directly like that. And again, it will be posted to the YouTube channel as well. Correct, Frank?
Well, the attachment wouldn't, but just the video would.
Okay, gotcha.
No, that's great. I'm glad, you know, everybody gets something from this. And I'm glad that we've got it in perpetuity, so to speak.
And I do want to just mention that we will have another talk next month that folks within and without or from outside the chapter are welcome to join. We'll have Peter McCoy of Radical Mycology joining us, and he'll be talking all about fungal ecology and how that relates to fruit trees. And we'll have more scheduled for the time being online.
And that'll be on our ocfruit.com website.
Yep. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Fantastic job. Take care all. Be safe.